Tonight we enter the dim storerooms of ancient Sumer, where broken tablets sleep under museum glass. In the late 19th century, excavators working among the ruins of southern Mesopotamia began lifting clay fragments from dust, salt, and collapsed brick. Some were ordinary accounts, the kind of records that remind you ancient people also worried about sheep, grain, and debts. Very comforting, really. Humanity invents writing, and almost immediately uses it to complain about administration. Yet among these practical records were stranger pieces, fragments of kings, floods, divine councils, and a world arranged according to memories older than the cities that preserved them. At the British Museum, scholars studying tablets from ancient Mesopotamia found versions of flood traditions and royal lists that seemed to stretch time far beyond normal rains. At the University of Pennsylvania Museum, excavations at Nippur and other sites helped reveal how deep and layered Sumerian civilization truly was. Archaeologists from American universities, including teams connected with the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, mapped temples, tablets, and buried streets with patient care. Their work did not prove a hidden fantasy. It proved something quieter and perhaps more unsettling. The Sumerians remembered their past in ways that do not fit neatly into our modern shelves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles around you, write your location and local time below. Somewhere, someone else is listening in darkness too. You are not rushing tonight. You are stepping slowly into a landscape of baked earth, reed marsh, and old river breath. The air tastes faintly of dust and water. Above you, the sky is wide and black, crowded with stars that seem closer than they should. Around you rise the low outlines of mud brick walls, softened by time, wind, and the patient chewing of salt. This is southern Mesopotamia, the land between great rivers, where the Tigris and Euphrates once changed their courses like restless serpents. Here, cities rose from an alluvial plain. Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, and Nippur became names with weight, names pressed into clay by hands that are now dust. Records confirm that Sumerian writing developed during the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, first for accounting, storage, labour, and temple management. It is a wonderfully human beginning. Not prophecy, not poetry, mostly receipt. But receipts can become memory. A tablet can begin with barley, then lead you into a vanished world. You stand in an imaginary excavation trench as evening cools the plain. The walls of the trench are cut through layers of occupation, each band a quiet sentence in earth, burned brick, packed floor, ash, pottery, silt, a broken seal, a child's bead. The past does not lie beneath you like a neat book. It lies like a room after a long departure. Everything scattered, everything meaningful, nothing fully explained. Somewhere in that buried confusion, a clay tablet waits. It is not large, it is not grand, or it does not shine. It is small enough to fit into a hand, rough along the edges, marked by wedge-shaped signs. Yet those signs carry the weight of a civilization that believed memory was a sacred task. The tablet has survived heat, collapse, conquest, damp soil, insects, and thousands of years of human forgetfulness. It has outlasted kings who believed themselves eternal. There is gentle irony there. The king becomes dust, the paperwork remains. You hear the soft scrape of a brush against clay. A scholar bends closer under lamplight. The signs are difficult, sometimes damaged, sometimes uncertain. One mark may change a name. One missing line may swallow a god, a city, or a warning. The work is slow because the dead do not speak clearly. They murmur through gaps, And in those gaps, the mystery begins. The Sumerian records do not speak with one single voice. They are archives of temple economy, royal power, myth, ritual, school exercises, and copied traditions. A student might practice signs by copying an old story. A priest might preserve an origin tale. A later scribe might reshape an inherited account to suit a new city or ruler. Memory moves like water through channels. It keeps something, it changes something else. Researchers at Yale and Oxford have long emphasized that ancient Mesopotamian texts must be read as literature, administration, theology, and political memory together. That is the scholarly trouble, and also the beauty. A tablet may not be a literal report, but it may still preserve the emotional shape of real catastrophe. A myth may not give you a calendar date, but it can reveal what a people feared, valued, and believed had happened long before anyone alive could remember. Perhaps that is why these records feel so strangely alive. They do not simply say a flood occurred. They say the world was once arranged differently. They say kingship descended. They say cities were chosen. They say the noise of humanity troubled heaven. They say something happened, and afterward the world was not the same. The central mystery tonight is not whether every line is factual in the modern sense. Ancient scribes were not writing for modern footnotes, which is inconsiderate of them, but understandable. The deeper question is why so many fragments point toward rupture. Why does Sumerian tradition keep returning to beginnings, interruptions, divine decisions, and a great event that separates one age from another? Some scholars view these stories as theological explanations for flood-prone river plains. Others argue that they preserve cultural memories of real environmental disasters in early Mesopotamia. Still others caution that we are looking at literary traditions shaped over centuries, not transparent windows into prehistory. The debate remains open, and perhaps it should remain open. Certainty can be a rather noisy guest. You let the uncertainty settle. Outside the trench, night deepens. The reeds along a vanished canal hiss softly in the mind. Somewhere, cattle shift. Somewhere, sandals scuff against packed clay. You imagine a scribe in a small room, seated with damp clay across his lap. His reed stylus presses, lifts, presses again. Each sign is deliberate. Each sign is a small wound made in earth before the earth hardens forever. He may not think of you. He may not imagine glass cases, climate control, university catalogues, or someone listening through headphones in a quiet room thousands of years later. He writes for a temple, a school, a ruler, a god, or the duty of tradition. The tablet travels beyond him, moves through fare and burial that waits under dust while languages die above it. That is the strange patience of clay. A fringe tidbit sometimes whispered around these records is that the Sumerians preserved memories of beings or teachers from a world before ordinary humanity. Some modern writers point to divine lists, strange lifespans, and pre-flood kings as signs of lost visitors or vanished master races. Mainstream historians do not accept those claims as evidence in that form. Still, the fascination reveals something important. The texts themselves create an atmosphere of deep antiquity, where power descends from elsewhere and human history begins under supervision. You can disagree with the fringe idea and still feel the chill, because the tablets do not describe a simple beginning. They describe a managed beginning, a structured beginning, a beginning watched by powers beyond the human city, whether those powers are gods, metaphors, memories, or royal theology. They stand over the first chapters of civilization like figures seen through smoke, and so the night's path opens. Not with a shout, not with a discovery that solves everything. It opens with a small broken tablet, lifted from old dirt, carrying lines that seem to insist history is not a smooth road. It is more like a floor laid over older floors. Beneath every beginning lies another beginning. Beneath every city lies mud. beneath every official record lies a quieter question. What was remembered? What was reshaped? What was buried? And what, perhaps, history tried very gently to erase? You walk now through the low warmth of an ancient afternoon, when the plain seems endless and the horizon trembles. The ground beneath your feet is not empty. Though it first appears that way, it is a vast skin of pale dust, cracked by heat, crossed by forgotten channels, and silvered in places where old salts have risen through the soil. The rivers have withdrawn from some places and pressed into others. They have abandoned beds, stolen fields, and left whole settlements blinking under the hard sun, as though waking from a dream they did not choose. This is the world beneath the first cities. Not marble, not mountain, stone, not the shining ruin you may expect from later empires. Sumer is made of mud, reed, water, sweat, and organisation. Its walls rise because hands shape clay bricks and dry them under the sun. Its temples climb because labourers carry baskets on their backs. Its streets form because feet repeat the same paths until habit becomes architecture. You can smell the city before you reach it. There is damp clay from canal banks. There is smoke from cooking fires. There is fish drying near reed huts, date syrup thickening in jars, and the sour press of animals crowded near water. It is not romantic in the clean museum sense. It is alive, which means it is slightly inconvenient. Someone is arguing about grain. Someone is sweeping dust from a doorway, losing the battle immediately. Someone is probably late with an offering and hoping the gods are in a generous mood. The first cities do not rise from silence. They rise from noise, need, and repetition. Archaeological work across southern Iraq has shown that urban life in Sumer grew from earlier villages. Irrigation systems, trade networks, and temple-centered economies. Excavations at places such as Uruk reveal dramatic growth during the 4th millennium before the Common Era, when settlement, craft production, accounting, and monumental building expanded together. Scholars at the University of Chicago and other major research centers have long studied this change as one of the great transformations in human history. People did not simply gather, they became arranged. That is the important word. Arranged. The fields must be watered in order, the canals must be cleared, the seed must be stored, the sheep must be counted, the workers must be fed, the temple must receive, record, redistribute, and command. Nothing about this is mystical at first glance. It is practical. Yet practicality, repeated across generations, becomes something almost sacred. A canal is a line of survival. A granary is a promise against hunger. A tablet is a small prison for memory, keeping it from wandering away. You pause at the imagined edge of a canal. The water is brown and slow, carrying reeds, insects, and reflected ski. A boy drives goats along the bank with sleepy authority. A woman washes a jar and watches the current with the quiet suspicion people reserve for powerful things. The river gives life. Certainly, it also takes liberties. It swells without asking. It breaks walls. It leaves silt on floors, fish in courtyards, and snakes where grain should be. In such a land, history is never fully dry. Every foundation remembers water. Records from early Mesopotamia confirm that irrigation agriculture supported dense populations and helped cities develop in a region where rainfall alone was uncertain. That fact sounds tidy when written in a university book, but on the ground it means something more fragile. It means your food depends on channels cut through mud. It means one neglected embankment can ruin a district. It means kingship, temple authority, and human labour become bound to the behaviour of rivers. Here, nature is not background. Nature is government with the worse handwriting. The landscape teaches dependence. It teaches fear. It teaches planning. Perhaps it also teaches myth. When a people live in a place where water creates land and destroys it, their oldest stories may naturally speak of beginnings in marsh, clay, and flood. A council decree proves less than a riverbank during the wrong season. A royal boast means little when the water climbs the threshold, so the Sumerian imagination grows in a land where stability must be built every year. Your mind drifts toward the city itself. Mud brick houses gather in clusters, their walls thick against heat. Narrow lanes twist between them, shaded in places by reed mats or upper rooms leaning toward one another. The air is full of small sounds. Sandals slap softly on packed earth, donkeys snort, potters turn clay with damp hands. Somewhere, a stylus scratches. Somewhere, a child repeats signs in a schoolroom, wishing civilization had remained comfortably illiterate. Above the ordinary roofs, a temple platform rises. It is not merely a religious building. It is a center of storage, employment, ritual, and identity. The temple household gathers goods and people into a system. Grain flows in, rations flow out, offerings rise as smoke, names enter tablets. Human lives become lines in an account, which is perhaps the first truly frightening magic of bureaucracy. You are counted, therefore you exist. Oxford scholars have often described the early Mesopotamian temple as both sacred institution and economic power. That combination matters. The divine world is not somewhere far away. It is woven into labour schedules, fields, animals, and sealed jars. To serve the temple is to serve the god. To maintain the canal is to protect the city. To bring barley is to participate in cosmic order. Even when your back hurts and nobody has invented weekends, it feels ordinary. That is what makes it deep. The hidden mystery does not begin in thunder. It begins with systems that seem too heavy for small human lives. The city becomes a machine made of mud and belief. Its gears are priests, scribes, farmers, boatmen, brewers, weavers, guards, and children learning signs by repetition. Each person is part of something larger, something that promises meaning while demanding obedience. A quirky fringe tidbit lingers at the edge of this world. Some modern enthusiasts have suggested that the sudden rise of Sumerian urban complexity looks almost too abrupt, as though knowledge arrived from outside. They point to writing, mathematics, and organized temple economies as evidence of a mysterious inheritance. Mainstream archaeology gives a calmer answer. The changes were dramatic, but they grew from long developments across the region. Still, the feeling remains understandable. When you stand before Uruk's ancient layers, it can seem as if a curtain lifted and a city was already there. Human memory likes clean beginnings. The earth prefers gradual ones, yet gradual does not mean simple. A settlement can grow over centuries, while its people later remember that growth is an act of divine ordering. A canal can begin as a ditch and become a sacred boundary. A storeroom can become a temple archive. A ruler can inherit a working system and claim it descended from heaven. Very efficient. Really, if you must manage thousands of people, divine approval is useful stationery. The debate remains unsettled in one important sense. Scholars continue to ask how much early urban growth came from environmental pressure, temple management, trade, warfare, ideology, or the ambition of powerful households. Stanford historians and archaeologists have emphasized that no single cause explains the first cities. They were not invented by one brilliant administrator having a productive morning. They emerged from tangled forces, each pulling human beings into denser, more dependent life. You feel that dependence in the heat. A city in Sumer is a bargain. It offers bread, protection, trade, ritual, and belonging. It also asks for labour, obedience, taxes, and trust in people who keep records. To live there is to surrender a little solitude in exchange for survival. To leave may mean hunger. To stay may mean being measured. The dust thickens and into the hall. A door creaks open. Inside, the room is dim and cool. with reed mats on the floor and storage jars pressed against a wall. Clay tablets dry on a shelf. They do not yet tell grand legends. They record fields, workers, animals, beer and grain. But beneath such plain accounts lies the foundation of everything stranger that will follow. Once a society learns to trap names in clay, it can also trap myths. Once it counts rations, it can count kings. Once it records labour, it can record why labour exists at all. That is where the ordinary city becomes unsettling. The first records do not merely preserve what people had, they preserve what people owed. In the far distance, beyond the wall, reeds bend in the river wind. The marsh glimmers under a lowering sun. Ancient and patient, birds lift from the water in a sudden dark scatter. The city behind you continues its murmuring life, unaware that its smallest tablets will one day become evidence in a much larger question. What kind of event would a people remember through mud, labour, and sacred order? What kind of past would require cities to keep speaking? The answer is not yet clear. It rests under floors, under salt hole, under the first streets. It waits in the dust beneath civilization, where every brick seems to whisper that the world was built carefully because someone, somewhere, feared it could be unbuilt again. Your attention settles inside a room where the light is narrow and the air smells of damp clay. A young scribe sits cross-legged near a wall, with a smooth tablet resting against his palm. His reed stylus is cut at an angle, its tip darkened from use, his little edge ready to press order into the soft surface. He is not a prophet, not a magician, not the keeper of all forbidden truth. He is a trained worker in a hard profession, which means his back aches and his teacher is probably less impressed than he deserves. Still, something extraordinary is happening in his hand. He is making memory portable. The room is small, but it belongs to a larger world of schools, temples, storehouses, and elite households. The floor is swept, though dust returns with irritating loyalty. Small tablets lie in rows, some bearing lists of signs, others names of birds, trees, metals, professions, cities, and gods. A jar of water keeps clay workable. Reed scraps gather in a corner. Outside, someone calls for a donkey. Inside, a boy learns that civilization depends on neat handwriting, which is a cruel lesson at any age. Records confirm that Sumerian scribal training involved repeated copying, lexical lists, model texts, and mathematical exercises. Excavated school tablets from Mesopotamia show students practicing signs in careful rows, sometimes with clumsy mistakes still visible. Scholars at the University of Pennsylvania and Yale have described these schools as places where technical skill and cultural memory were taught together. A scribe could not only learn how to write, he learned what was worth writing again. That distinction matters. A receipt can be made once, a tradition must be copied. You can almost hear the teacher's voice, low and severe, guiding a student through ancient names. Press the sign more cleanly, leave space and do not flatten the corner. No, that is not the sign for barley. Congratulations, you've invented confusion. It is gentle comedy from a very old classroom, and it makes the room feel suddenly human. Yet beyond the practice, something more solemn is taking shape. The scribes are choosing continuity. They take older accounts and make them present again. They preserve royal names, temple hymns, divine genealogies, laws, laments, and stories of beginnings. They copy texts from damaged originals, from memory, or from teacher to student. Some works shift over time. A phrase changes, a god gains prominence, a city's importance rises or fades. The result is not a frozen archive, it is a living current, one that carries fragments from one generation into another. You look at a tablet drying near the doorway. Its signs are small, crowded, and almost humble. Yet they may contain a line about a king who ruled before disaster, or a god who shaped human destiny, or a city founded when the world was still wet with beginning. The tablet does not explain itself. It does not say whether the story is ritual, memory, teaching, royal propaganda, or something older than all categories. It simply waits for another reader. That is the strange power of the scribal world. It does not preserve certainty. It preserves voices. Ancient Sumerian texts survive because later scribes copied them, sometimes centuries after the first versions were composed. This is not unusual in ancient literature, but it creates a shadowy depth. When you read a preserved tablet, you may be reading a late copy of an older tradition, shaped by a school, preserved by habit, and carried through political change. Oxford. Assyriologists have often noted that a Mesopotamian literature grew through copying, adaptation, and scholarly commentary. The past reached the present through trained hands. And trained hands have opinions. A scribe may copy faithfully, but even faithfulness has edges. He may select one version over another. He may standardize a name. He may repair a damaged line according to what he thinks it should say. He may serve a temple that favors one god, a city that honors one tradition, a court that wants one version of the past. Even a careful copyist lives inside power, so the hidden event becomes complicated. It may not survive as a clear report. It may survive as repetition, distortion, and ritual memory. It may appear in a royal list as a boundary between ages. It may appear in a flood story as divine decision. It may appear in a creation account as an explanation for why human beings labor. It may be broken into pieces and distributed in different texts as though the event itself has been scattered across the archive. Your mind drifts toward the shelves. On one tablet, names of rulers stretch beyond ordinary time. On another, gods debate the burden of existence. On another, cities are named as though they belong to a sacred sequence. None alone gives the full shape. Together, they feel like pieces of a door, not yet assembled, still leaning against the walls. A quirky fringe tidbit attaches itself to this scribal mystery. Some modern writers imagine the scribes as guardians of a deliberately hidden record, preserving secret knowledge under the cover of myth. They picture temple schools as quiet vaults of pre-human history, where initiates copied dangerous truths in symbolic language. Mainstream scholarship does not accept that dramatic picture as evidence. The scribal schools were real, but they were not proven secret brotherhoods. Still, one can understand why the thought appears. When clay tablets carry impossible kings, divine engineers, and world-end megawatts, secrecy almost seems to gather by itself. The more restrained question is better. What did scribes believe they were preserving? Not what modern fantasy wants them to preserve, but what their own culture demanded from memory. In Sumer, writing had authority because it could outlast speech. A spoken tale fades into the air. A clay tablet hardens. Fire, which destroys many materials, can accidentally bake clay into survival. That is almost annoyingly poetic. The same disaster that burns a room may strengthen the record hidden inside it. The past is mischievous that way. You run your thumb in imagination over a tablet's edge. It is rough, uneven, vulnerable. One drop before drying could smear a line. One collapse could break a corner. One careless digger could lose a fragment forever. Yet enough remains to reveal a world obsessed with order. Lists classify creation. Accounts classify labor. Myths classify divine power. Royal texts classify time itself. The scribes are not simply recording history. They are arranging reality into patterns. Scholars continue to debate how far Sumerian literary texts preserve earlier oral traditions. Some specialists argue that themes found in later written works may have circulated for generations before being fixed in clay. Others warn that written versions are products of specific institutions and should not be treated as simple windows into an older, untouched world. Research from leading universities often holds both ideas in tension. The texts are ancient, but they are also crafted. They remember, but they also compose. That open scholarly debate is where the atmosphere deepens. Because an event can survive in culture without surviving as a newspaper report, it can become a pattern in stories, a before and after, a moral wound, a sacred explanation. It can be copied by students who no longer understand its first meaning. It can become so familiar that nobody asks why it is there. That may be the most effective way history erases something, not by destroying every trace, but by turning it into tradition. A bell-like sound carries from outside, perhaps metal struck near a workshop, perhaps only the mind giving shape to distant noise. The scribe pauses, wets the clay lightly, and begins again. His stylus presses a sign for a city, then a sign for kingship, then a sign connected to heaven, or order, or a divine name. The exact reading belongs to scholars, the feeling belongs to the room. You sense the discipline of it. Line by line, the scribes rebuild a world they inherited. They do not know they are giving modern people fragments of a mystery. They are keeping the wheels of temple, court, and school turning. Yet beneath their practical labour, older shadows move. The copied stories carry memories of creation, disaster, and divine control, memories too powerful to vanish and too unstable to remain unchanged. Perhaps that is why the tablets feel both official and haunted. They are lessons, accounts, hymns, and lists. They are also places where the earliest city dwellers try to explain why life is burdened, why kingship matters, why water terrifies, and why human beings seem to have entered a world already claimed by powers beyond them. The scribe's hand grows tired. The tablet fills, the room darkens, and somewhere in the quiet pressure of reed against clay, a story that may have begun long before recorded history passes into another night, not fully understood, not fully forgotten, and not yet ready to release its last small sign. For a moment, it feels as though time itself has become a clay wall covered in names. You stand in a quiet chamber where a tablet has been placed beneath soft light. It is not beautiful in the way gold is beautiful. It has no bright surface, no jewel, no proud inscription carved into stone for a conquering army. It is brown, damaged, and strangely modest. Yet the lines pressed into it hold a sequence of kings that stretches from ordinary history into something far older, stranger, and more difficult to place. This is the world of the Sumerian king list. The text arranges rulers and cities into a chain of kingship, presenting authority as something that moves from one city to another. First, kingship is said to descend from heaven, then it rests in one city, then another, then another. A pattern emerges, calm and formal, as though history were a procession in which power enters, sits, rises, and moves on. It sounds administrative. It feels ceremonial. It also becomes deeply unsettling when the earliest reigns are read. Some kings rule for thousands of years. Not decades, not long human lifetimes, thousands. Records confirm that surviving versions of the Sumerian king list were copied in ancient Mesopotamia, with one famous example held in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. Scholars have studied the list as a political and literary composition, not a simple chronological register. It contains rulers known from other sources, yet it also gives impossible lengths of reign to earlier figures. That mixture is the puzzle. It does not sit neatly in either myth or history. It leans between them. Watching, you notice, the first named cities belong to a time before a great flood. Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, Shurapak. The names feel like stepping stones across dark water. The tablet presents them with a steady hand, as though nothing could be more natural than rulers reigning for spans longer than the many civilizations. Then comes the dividing moment. The flood sweeps over. Kingship descends again. human time seems to restart under altered conditions. You look closer, and the numbers breathe strangely. A ruler may reign for 28,800 years, another for 36,000. These figures cannot be ordinary regnal years in the modern historical sense. Nobody in mainstream scholarship treats them as literal human lifespans, yet dismissing them too quickly can make you miss their function. They enlarge the past until it becomes sacred distance. They place the earliest world behind a veil, where time runs differently and human categories soften. The tablet is telling you something, not simply how long men ruled. It tells you that the beginning was not like now. A council decree from a later city might prove who held office for a year, but this list is concerned with something larger. It imagines kingship as a gift from above, a force that enters the world before ordinary memory, before known dynasties, before the familiar scale of politics. Research from Cambridge and Oxford has often treated the king list as a way to organise competing city traditions into a single vision of legitimate rule. The list makes history look unified, even when real history was messy, local, and full of rival claims. That is useful, naturally so. Kings enjoy tidy history. It saves everyone time. Yet the tidy surface conceals a deep break. The list divides the world into before and after. Before the flood, reigns are enormous. Cities appear almost primordial, and kingship rests in places associated with the oldest sacred traditions. After the flood, the numbers shrink, although not immediately into normal human scale. Time descends gradually, like a god learning arithmetic. You can hear the slow scratch of the scribe who copied it. He is not inventing modern history. He is shaping inherited memory into order. He may believe the list expresses truth, but truth in his world is not limited to dates and signatures. Truth can be theological, political, cosmic, and ceremonial. To say kingship descended from heaven is not a minor decorative flourish. It means authority belongs to the structure of the universe. It means city rule has roots beyond the city wall. A strange comfort lies in that. A stronger unease follows, because once kingship is placed before the flood, human society is also placed before the flood. The text implies organised cities, rulers, and divine authority in a time separated from later existence by catastrophe. It sketches a hidden timeline where civilization is not born once, cleanly and finally, but interrupted. The world has an earlier arrangement, then something erases it. Then the system begins again. Your mind drifts through those pre-flood cities. Eridu rises beside marsh water, white temple walls catching sun. Bad Tibira glows in the imagination as a place of craft and divine association. Sippar stands beneath a blazing solar gaze. Shurapak waits with a darker weight, tied in later tradition to the survivor of the flood. Whether these memories map real urban phases, sacred geography, or literary construction, they form a landscape of beginnings. The list does not explain much. It simply names and counts. That restraint makes it more haunting. A dramatic text might tell you what to feel. A list does not. Give sequence, city, ruler, reign, and then passes onward. The silence between entries becomes enormous. You wonder what the scribes imagined when they copied those numbers. Did they picture giant ancestors, semi-divine rulers, a world governed by different laws? Or did the old figures already function as symbolic mathematics, inherited from traditions whose meanings had become distant? A quirky fringe tidbit often circles these impossible reigns. Some enthusiasts claim the long lifespans point to non-human kings, ancient visitors, or rulers from a lost civilization. They argue that no culture would preserve such numbers unless some distorted memory stood behind them. Mainstream historians approach the issue differently. They see mythic time, sacred numerology, political theology, and literary tradition. Still, the numbers do what numbers do best when they are too large. They make the imagination misbehave. You feel that misbehaviour gently. It is not necessary to believe every wild claim to understand why the list unsettles readers. The earliest names seem to stand at the edge of a concealed age. Their reigns stretch so far that they make later empires look brief, almost like sparks. Even mighty kings become temporary after such arithmetic. The tablet humbles history by making normal time feel young. Scholars continue to debate the exact purpose of the king list. Some view it mainly as royal propaganda, a way for later rulers to claim continuity with primeval authority. Others emphasize its preservation of older city traditions that were woven into a single sequence. Some researchers ask whether it reflects real memories of shifting political centers in early Mesopotamia, transformed by mythic exaggeration. The debate remains alive because the text refuses to be only one thing. You let that refusal remain. The list is political. Yes, it is literary. Yes, it is religious. Yes, it may also be a fossil of memory, though not a fossil shaped like a modern fact. It preserves the idea that before known history there was a former ordering of the world, cities existed, kings ruled, divine authority operated. Then water came. Afterward, kingship had to descend again. That repeated descent matters. If kingship descends again, something must have been interrupted. If it returns, something must have been lost. In the chamber, the tablet seems smaller than the mystery it carries. Your breathing slows. The clay surface is pitted and worn, but the idea inside it remains sharp. A people who built cities from mud imagined power as ancient beyond measurement, older than ordinary dynasties, older than the world they knew. They placed that power beyond a catastrophic boundary, then traced its return into human affairs. Perhaps that is how the history preserves an erased event, not by telling you everything directly, by leaving a seam. The Sumerian king list is such a seam. On one side are reigns too vast for normal memory. On the other are rulers who step closer to the archaeological world. Between them lies the flood, the pause, the dark line across the tablet's ordered march. The list does not ask you to solve it quickly. It asks you to sit with the possibility that ancient people understood history as layered, broken, and restarted. The room grows still around the clay. Outside, imagined night presses against the walls. Somewhere beyond the museum glass, the rivers continue their old work, moving silt grain by grain toward the sea. Kings vanish, cities sink, scribes die, numbers remain, and the first kings, whether mythic, symbolic, political, or dim echoes of forgotten chiefs, stand in their impossible years like watchmen beside a door no one has fully opened. The sound comes first as a low trembling under the floor of the world. You are standing near the edge of a city whose walls are made from sun-dried brick, and the evening air has turned strangely heavy. The sky is not yet black, but it has lost its kindness. A dull wind moves through the reeds and bends them all in one direction, as if the marsh itself has begun listening. Dogs bark at nothing. Birds lift suddenly from pools beyond the fields. In the lanes, people glance towards the river with that old human instinct that knows danger earlier than language. Water is never only water here. It is road, field, boundary, and judge. In the Sumerian tradition, the flood is not merely a storm with impressive manners. It is a dividing event, a moment that separates one ordering of life from another. The old records speak in fragments, and their surviving lines do not always agree in every detail. Yet the pattern is unmistakable. The gods decide. The waters rise. A chosen survivor is warned. A vessel is built. Life passes through disaster in a narrow wooden shelter, while the world outside is swallowed into silence. This is not the flood story from one later tradition alone. It belongs to a wider Mesopotamian family of memory. Versions appear in Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian forms, the Sumerian account of Ziusudra, preserved only in broken portions, belongs to the oldest known stream of this tradition. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied these flood texts as part of Mesopotamia's deep literary inheritance. The mainstream historical fact is steady. Ancient Mesopotamian flood traditions are real, old, and multiply, attested in clay. The question is what they remember. You stand now in the imagined courtyard of Shuruppak, where grain bins lean against mud brick walls, and the smell of wet reeds drifts from the river. A man listens, not because he is braver than others, but because something has entered the edges of ordinary life. In the mythic telling, a divine warning reaches the human survivor. It does not arrive like a trumpet from a painted sky. It comes with secrecy, through a wall, through a dreamlike whisper, through the strange privacy that ancient texts often give to sacred knowledge. Build, prepare, preserve life. The command is simple, its meaning is enormous. The human being is not asked to defeat the waters. That would be ambitious, and frankly very on brand for later kings. He is asked to endure them. He gathers wood, pitch, animals, food, family, craftsmen, and whatever else the story allows into the shape of survival. You hear ropes tighten. You smell bitumen, thick and sharp. You feel the rough grain of timber beneath the palm, a texture suddenly transformed into hope. The flood tradition carries a practical memory beneath its sacred speech. Southern Mesopotamia was a floodplain, shaped by rivers that changed channels and spread silt across land. Archaeologists have found flood deposits at some ancient sites, though not one single layer covering all Mesopotamia at once. That matters. It keeps the scholarship careful. The stories may reflect local catastrophic floods, cultural memory of repeated inundations, or a literary vision of divine judgment shaped by the environmental experience. The scholarly debate remains open and beautifully cautious. Some researchers argue that repeated river floods became magnified into one cosmic event. Others suggest that a particularly severe regional disaster may have left a lasting scar on communal memory. A more literary view sees the flood as a narrative device for resetting kingship, morality, and divine authority. None of these explanations fully empties the story of its power. The waters remain, whether they are physical, symbolic, or both. Rain begins in the mind, not gentle rain, heavy, slanting rain that strikes mud walls and turns lane dust into black paste. The river lifts, canals overflow, reed fences collapse, pottery floats through courtyards, a storage jar rolls against a doorway with a hollow sound, someone shouts a name and receives no answer. The city that seemed so organized becomes fragile, because all systems depend on ground staying where it was placed. The ground refuses. Water enters the houses. The strange thing about ancient flood stories is how quiet they can feel at their center. Modern imagination loves spectacle, but clay tablets often preserve the event with solemn compression. A few lines can hold terror more effectively than 1,000 screams. The gods bring the flood, the storm rages, the people vanish, then the waters recede. The world is different. A council decree proves authority, a flood proves vulnerability. You sense why such an event would cling to memory. A flood does not only kill or destroy, it rearranges meaning. It makes people ask whether the gods are angry, whether rulers failed, whether rituals were neglected, whether human noise grew too loud, whether creation itself needed correction. In the Mesopotamian imagination, catastrophe becomes conversation between heaven and Runa Earth, though humanity is not always invited to speak first. A quirky fringe tidbit attaches itself to the vessel. Some modern writers compare Mesopotamian floodboats to advanced rescue craft, imagining ancient engineers preserving knowledge from a drowned civilization. They point to the careful construction details in later versions and whisper about lost science. Mainstream scholars read these details through ancient boat building, mythic convention, and ritual symbolism. Still, the image is irresistible, a dark hull on rising water. Carrying seed life through a broken age has the shape of a secret even when it is not one. You listen to the rain deepen. Inside the vessel, the air becomes close, animals shift, wood groans, pitch sweats its bitter smell. A child presses against a parent, unable to understand why the world outside has become sound without shape. The survivor, whether named Zusudra, Atrahasis, or Utnapishtim in different traditions, becomes less like a hero and more like a witness. He does not conquer the flood, he outlives it, which is heavier. Survival is not victory, it is memory with a heartbeat. When the waters lower, the story does not return easily to normal. Mud covers what was once familiar. Fields are erased under silt. Boundaries vanish. The dead are beyond counting. The air smells of wet earth, rot, and beginning. Birds return in uncertain arcs. Sunlight rests on a world scrubbed too clean. The survivor offers reverence, and divine order resumes, though not exactly as it was. This is where the hidden timeline sharpens. The flood tradition does not merely say disaster happened, it says existence was interrupted by decision. It says the human world could be judged, overwhelmed, and then restarted under new terms. It says life continues, but carries a scar. That scar becomes ritual, story, royal memory, and the quiet line dividing primeval time from the age of later cities. In your ears, the storm softens into the scratch of a stylus. A scribe copies broken lines, perhaps not knowing every older meaning. He preserves the flood because his culture has made it necessary. The story explains why the world has limits. It explains why human beings are mortal, dependent, and bound to serve powers they cannot fully understand. It explains why kingship must be renewed, why temples matter, and why the rivers must be respected like living authorities with terrible moods. The unsettling thought is simple. Maybe history did not erase the event entirely. Maybe it domesticated it. It turned terror into tradition. It placed the waters inside a story, gave the survivor a name, gave the gods a counsel, and gave later generations a way to sleep beneath skies that might still open. The clay tablets do not let you know exactly what happened. They do something more ancient. They let you feel how a people lived with the memory that the world beneath their feet could become water again. The rain fades. The river remains. And in the dark shine of the receding flood, the first outline of a changed humanity waits, wet with silt, breathing softly, carrying forward a story that refuses to dry completely. The city does not disappear all at once, and that is almost the crueler thing. You walk through a settlement where the morning sun falls on walls that still stand, and though their rooms are no longer filled with ordinary voices, doorways gape open. Roof beams have fallen inward, a grinding stone rests beside a hearth, waiting for hands that never return. Clay, jars lean half buried in wind-blown grit. A reed mat has rotted into a dark stain across the floor, leaving only the memory of where someone once slept. Silence has weight here. It presses against the skin like heat. In southern Mesopotamia, cities and villages could be abandoned, reduced, rebuilt, or swallowed into new layers of occupation. Archaeological trenches show this clearly. One floor lies beneath another. A burned level rests under a rebuilding phase. A silt deposit divides human activity from human return. The earth becomes an archive of interruption. The old places do not vanish from the planet, they sink into it. Slowly folded under dust, flood mud, collapsed brick, and later settlement. Records from archaeological excavations confirm that many Mesopotamian sites are tells. artificial mounds formed by centuries of mud brick construction, decay and rebuilding. Scholars connected with the University of Chicago, the University of Pennsylvania, and other major research institutions have studied these layers to understand how ancient communities changed over time. A city made from mud brick is never fixed. It rises by falling into itself, generation upon generation, until ruin becomes foundation. That's a strange kind of survival. The dead city holds up the living one. You pause at the edge of a collapsed street. The lane is narrow, its surface uneven with broken pottery and powdered brick. A door socket remains in place, though the wooden door has long since disappeared. The small details trouble you more than any grand ruin might. A cup, a bead, a seal impression, a child's toy animal made of clay. History becomes intimate when it fits inside a palm. A palace can feel distant. A lost shoe does not. The abandoned rooms suggest departures of many kinds. Some people may have fled rising water. Some may have moved when canals shifted and fields grew salty. Some may have been drawn into larger cities by trade, labour, or power. Some may have died in conflict, famine, disease, or slow environmental decline. Ancient abandonment is rarely a single dramatic moment with appropriate music. It is often a long unravelling, which is less cinematic and much more human. You smell the dust of unused space. No bread bakes, no beer ferments, no wool is dyed in vats. The air carries only the dry mineral scent of old walls. A lizard moves over a threshold with the confidence of a new property owner, very bold, diddle, considering it has done none of the paperwork. In the courtyard, wind has gathered fine sand against the base of the wall, forming a small slope where footsteps once passed. The canals beyond the settlement tell a quieter story. Irrigation brings life, but it also brings danger. Water left standing in hot fields can leave salts behind, and over generations those salts can damage crops. Scholars have long discussed salinization as one pressure within southern Mesopotamian agriculture, especially in areas where drainage was difficult. Research associated with environmental archaeology has shown that human management of water could sustain dense settlement, yet also create problems that demanded constant labour and adaptation. This fact feels almost symbolic. The system that feeds the city can also weaken it. A debate continues among historians and archaeologists about how much environmental stress contributed to urban decline or shifting settlement patterns in ancient Sumer. Some emphasize salinity, river movement, and changing agricultural yields. Others point toward political rivalry, warfare, trade disruption, and administrative collapse. Many now prefer a braided explanation, where landscape and human decisions pull together. The old city is not defeated by one enemy, it is worn by many hands, including its own. You move towards a house whose walls are preserved waist high. Inside bar, a low bench remains against one side. Someone once sat there in shade, perhaps repairing a basket, perhaps gossiping about neighbours with the timeless confidence of people everywhere. The domestic quiet feels almost sacred, not because gods visibly hover here, but because ordinary life has left its outline so gently. A jar in the corner has cracked. Its mouth is filled with soil. Perhaps grain was stored there, perhaps dates, perhaps nothing at all when the final occupants left. The uncertainty is part of the ruin. Archaeologists read patterns, but they do not receive confessions. They infer from objects, layers, chemical traces, inscriptions, animal bones, seeds, and architecture. The city speaks, but never in full sentences. This is where the erased event becomes harder to grasp. If disaster struck only once, one might expect a clean mark, a single burned layer, a thick flood deposit, a sudden end. Sometimes archaeology does provide such moments. More often, It reveals an uneven landscape of damage, reuse, decline, and return. People are stubborn. They rebuild beside danger, because fields are there, ancestors are there, gods are there, and moving house is dreadful even without 5,000 years of bureaucracy. A quirky fringe tidbit drifts around certain abandoned Mesopotamian sites. Some enthusiasts claim that lost cities preserve traces of forbidden technology, hidden chambers, or vanished priesthoods carrying secrets beneath temple platforms. These claims usually outrun the evidence, often at impressive speed. Mainstream archaeology is much slower and less theatrical. It finds drains, ovens, tablets, graves, workshops, and storage rooms. Yet there's a quieter wonder in that. The ordinary evidence is already mysterious enough. A drain can reveal a city's fears. An oven can reveal its hunger. A broken tablet can reveal its mind. You step beyond the houses toward the temple mound, where older layers lie buried under later sacred rebuilding. Temples were frequently reconstructed on the same holy ground, raising platforms higher over time. This repeated building created both architectural continuity and deliberate burial. The old shrine might be covered, honoured, replaced, and hidden in one act. A sacred place could erase its own past while preserving it beneath the new floor. That is not conspiracy. It is ritual architecture. Still, the effect is haunting. You stand on a platform and realise that older sanctuaries may lie beneath your feet, sealed under pious renewal. The city chooses memory by covering it. The past is not destroyed. It is placed lower, deeper, closer to the underworld of mud and foundation. Anyone seeking origins must dig through reverence. The wind grows warmer. You imagine the final day of one neighbourhood, not as panic, but as exhaustion. A family loads baskets. A man seals a small jar, then decides it's not worth carrying. A woman looks once at the doorway she's swept for years. Children are told to stop asking questions. Someone says the canal no longer brings enough water. Someone says the fields taste bitter. Someone says the officials in the larger city have changed the ration lists again, because apparently paperwork survives every apocalypse. They leave. The house remains. Over seasons, the roof collapses, wind cuts lines through the walls, dust enters, insects nest, silt covers the floor. Later people may settle nearby, using old bricks, walking over hidden rooms without knowing whose breath once warmed them. Eventually even the name may shift, fade, or survive only in a list copied by a tired student. Yet silence is not emptiness. Silence is stored information. The abandoned cities of Sumer give shape to a world constantly negotiating with loss. They show that civilization was not a straight ascent from village to empire. It was a fragile arrangement of water, labour, faith, memory, and mud. It could flourish brilliantly, then thin into absence. It could sink beneath its own walls. It could leave behind enough evidence to trouble future scholars, but not enough to satisfy them completely. You stand there while evening gathers in the ruined lane. The sky becomes violet above the flat plain. A distant bird crosses the light. The city seems to rest, yet not peacefully. It rests like someone who has stopped speaking because the listener arrived too late. Beneath your feet, each buried layer holds a question without a final answer. Was the Great Rupture one event, many disasters, or a story made from centuries of fear? The clay does not say plainly. The mud remembers in layers. And as the night cools the abandoned walls, the lost settlement settles deeper into itself, keeping its broken jars, its vanished voices, and its uneasy witness to a world that could be built with care, then covered without mercy. The temple courtyard is awake before dawn, when the stars still cling to the black edge of the sky. You stand among baskets, jars, ropes, and sleepy workers whose faces are pale in the first blue light. The air smells of damp reeds, wool, and smoke from a small fire near the gate. Someone coughs, someone mutters about the weight of barley, someone else counts workers with the calm cruelty of a person holding a tablet. The city is not yet loud, but its machinery is already turning. Above the courtyard, the temple platform rises in layered silence. Its walls are not decorative background, they are the centre around which food, labour, ritual, and authority circulate. Men and women bring goods, receive rations, carry loads, tend animals, grind grain, brew beer, weave cloth, clear canals, and serve offices whose names now feel both ordinary and sacred. In this world, worship is not confined to prayer. Worship has sore shoulders, worship has mud under its nails. Records confirm that early Mesopotamian temples controlled extensive resources and organised large groups of workers. Excavated administrative tablets from sites such as Uruk, Lagash, and Nippur record labour teams, grain allocations, livestock, textiles, and offerings. Scholars at the University of Chicago and the University of Pennsylvania have shown how temple households combined religion and economy in a single institutional body. The gods did not merely receive hymns, they owned fields, animals, storehouses, and schedules. That is a very practical kind of divinity. Heaven keeps accounts its out. In the Sumerian imagination, the gods are not distant ornaments painted onto the sky. They are powers with cities, households, preferences, tempers, and responsibilities. Each major city belongs under divine patronage, and each god has a sphere of influence, and the world is ordered through divine offices, much like a grand administration. There are gods of sky, water, storm, grain, writing, birth, war, and fate. Creation itself seems to operate as a structured household, only larger, stranger, and somewhat less open to complaints. You hear a gate beam groan as workers enter the yard. A scribe presses marks into damp clay, registering who has arrived and what they will receive. Barley rations are measured, beer is allotted, wool is issued. The day's tasks move from tablet to body. The divine system becomes muscle, sweat, and repetition. One can imagine a worker glancing up at the temple and wondering whether the gods appreciate punctuality. Ancient religion, like modern management, appears to have valued attendance. The accounts of divine labour deepen the unease. In later Mesopotamian traditions, especially in the story often known through the Atrahasis tradition, lesser gods grow weary from hard work. They dig canals, maintain earth, and bear burdens until their complaint reaches the divine council. The solution is astonishing. Human beings are created to take on the work. The story survives in later Akkadian form, not as a pure Sumerian text, but it belongs to the wider Mesopotamian conversation about why humans exist. The human role is not presented as pure glory, it is service. You let that settle slowly. Humanity is useful. That idea can feel colder than any monster. In many modern stories, people are the centre, the purpose, the cherished final achievement. But here, the ancient account places humanity within a cosmic labour arrangement. People feed the gods through offerings, they maintain temples, they build canals, they perform rituals that keep the balance between divine and earthly order. Human beings matter, yes, but their importance is bound to obligation. Perhaps that is why Sumerian records feel so different from modern comfort. They do not flatter you immediately. They ask what you owe. A mainstream historical fact emerges through the administrative evidence. The earliest written records from Mesopotamia are strongly connected to resource management, labour organisation, and temple economies. This means that writing grew beside systems of work and control. It is not merely that myths later imagined humanity as labourers for gods. The real institutions of Sumer also organised human labour at a scale that required careful record keeping. Myth and administration mirror each other. Not perfectly, but hauntingly. A man lifts a basket of earth near an irrigation channel. He braces the strap against his head and leans forward. The soil is wet, heavy, and sour-smelling. Mosquitoes rise from the canal edge. The morning sun begins to burn through the mist. He may not think of cosmic purpose while carrying mud. He may think of breakfast, pain, family, debt, and whether the overseer is in one of those moods. Yet the temple story gives his labour a place in the universe. He is not merely digging, he is participating in order. That can comfort. That can also trap. A quirky fringe tidbit often grows around these divine labour stories. Some modern writers claim the gods were not gods at all, but powerful beings who engineered humans as workers in a forgotten project. They point to tales of divine councils, human creation, and assigned labour as if they were disguised technical reports. Mainstream historians do not accept that reading as evidence. These are religious and literary traditions shaped by ancient social realities. Still, the tidbit persists because the stories themselves are unusually blunt about human purpose. You can feel why people notice. The gods complain. Humans are made. Work continues. It is a stark sequence, almost too stark to ignore. The ancient mind does not hide the burden of life behind cheerful slogans. It says that existence is service, and service is woven into creation. That does not mean humans are worthless. In Mesopotamian thought, humans sustain the gods through offerings, praise, ritual care, and maintenance of sacred order. The relationship is reciprocal, but not equal. A farmer may feed a temple, but he does not set the terms of heaven. The open scholarly debate turns on interpretation. Some researchers view these myths as reflections of temple labourer systems and social hierarchy, projecting human institutions onto the divine world. Others suggest they express deep theological ideas about dependence, mortality, and cosmic maintenance. A different approach reads them as stories of tension between elites and workers, preserved within elite scribal culture itself. The debate remains subtle, because the texts speak with many layers at once. You stand near the temple storerooms as the day brightens. The doorways are sealed with clay tags and impressed marks. Jars sit in cool shadows. Boiled grain smells dry and sweet. Wool bundles carry the animal warmth of flocks. Fish, dates, oil, and flour move through the institution in measured quantities. The temple is both holy place and warehouse. Anyone expecting ancient religion to be delicate may need to step around the donkeys, yet the holiness is real. A statue of the god is cared for like a living presence. Meals are prepared, garments are offered, incense curls through dim rooms, priests move carefully, attending to gestures older than individual memory. The divine household must be maintained, because if the god is pleased, the city stands within order. If order weakens, fields fail, enemies come, or waters rise. The system is practical, spiritual, and anxious all at once. That anxiety is the thread. Why must the gods be fair? Why must canals never fail? Why must names be written? Why must rituals continue? Beneath the daily routines lies a fear that the world's arrangement is not guaranteed. It must be renewed. It must be ascenvid. It must be remembered. The event that haunts Sumerian records may not be only a flood or collapse. It may also be the ancient realization that human civilization exists under conditions imposed by powers, landscapes, and systems greater than itself. The worker wipes sweat from his face. The scribe dries his tablet. The temple casts its shadow. In that shadow, humanity's role becomes clearer and less comfortable. People are not wandering freely through a neutral world. They are placed inside a structure of obligation, where labour has sacred meaning and survival depends on obedience to natural and divine order. The gods who ordered labour may be mythic beings, poetic forms of power, or reflections of ancient institutions. Whatever they are, They leave humanity with the same quiet truth. Life must be maintained. Every day, the courtyard grows warmer. The first light touches the temple wall, turning mud brick briefly gold. Workers pass through the gate in lines, carrying tools toward fields, workshops, canals, and storerooms. Their footsteps fade into the city's widening noise. Above them, the divine house remains still, receiving the day as if it had been expected since the beginning, and perhaps in a time no longer remembered. This was the arrangement made after rupture. The gods would keep their places, the cities would keep their rights, the people would bear the work, the clay would keep the names, the rivers would be watched with nervous devotion. Order would continue, not because the world was safe, but because everyone had learned what disorder could do. Your hand rests near a lump of river clay, cool, dark, and soft beneath the fingertips. It does not look important. It is only earth mixed with water, the kind of material that gathers beside canals, sticks to sandals and stains hems, and dries into stubborn flakes on skin. Yet in the stories of ancient Mesopotamia, clay becomes intimate. It is not merely building material. It is the substance from which bodies, tablets, bricks, and cities emerge. Clay is the quiet matter of civilization, and perhaps the quiet matter of you. The room around you is dim and warm. A lamp trembles beside a low table. The smell of oil smoke mingles with wet earth and crushed reeds. Somewhere outside, a night insect clicks in a wall crack. A potter turns a vessel nearby, coaxing shape from mud with slow hands. The movement feels almost devotional, though he's only making something useful. In Sumer, useful things often stand very close to sacred things. Creation begins with touch, not a thunderous command, not a flash of distant brilliance. Touch. Ancient Mesopotamian traditions describe human beings as formed from clay, sometimes with divine substance or blood added in later accounts. The exact versions differ across languages and periods, but the shared idea is unmistakable. Humanity is made from earth, given purpose, and placed into a world already governed by divine powers. Scholars at Yale and Oxford have long treated these creation stories as religious literature shaped by social experience, ritual imagination, and the practical realities of life in an alluvial landscape. The mainstream fact is simple and profound. Clay was central to Mesopotamian hustle life in material and symbolic ways. It made houses, walls, tablets, vessels, figurines, ovens, and seals, carried writing, it held grain, it formed images of gods and people. When ancient stories imagined humanity from clay, they were not reaching for some remote poetic material. They were reaching down to the substance beneath their feet. You can almost feel the logic of it. People are shaped like vessels. People crack. People return to dust. The creation accounts do not flatter the human body into something pure and untouchable. They make it earthy, workable, vulnerable, and dependent. A person is formed, not self-made. A person receives breath, duty, and a place. The image is gentle at first, almost tender. Then it grows uneasy. If humanity is shaped like clay, then someone has shaped it. If people are made for a purpose, someone has defined that purpose before they can object. That is awkward. Creation is beautiful, but also administrative. You imagine divine hands pressing wet clay into human form. The shoulders are smoothed, the mouth is opened, the limbs are drawn out from earth's dark softness. There is no gore here, no harsh spectacle, only the slow intimacy of making. Yet the clay figure is not free in the modern romantic sense. It is born inside a system. The world has fields to tend, gods to feed, canals to clear, temples to maintain, and rituals to perform before breakfast ruins everyone's schedule. A council decision becomes a human heartbeat. In some later Mesopotamian accounts, the creation of humans follows conflict or exhaustion among divine beings. A god connected with rebellion or intelligence may be sacrificed, and human life receives something more than mud. This detail has inspired centuries of interpretation. Some scholars read it as a mythic explanation for human intelligence, mortality, and restlessness. Others see it as a way of linking humanity to both earthly matter and divine order. The debate remains open, because the story holds tenderness and burden in the same hand. Perhaps that is why it lingers. You are clay, yet not only clay. The body belongs to earth, but the duties reach upward. This double nature makes human beings useful and troublesome. They can serve the gods, but they can also make noise, rebel, neglect rituals, quarrel, boast, and fill cities with the sort of activity that keeps divine councils regretting their decisions. There is gentle sarcasm in the ancient vision. If one listens softly, the gods create workers, then discover workers are people. That is rarely a tidy arrangement. Records confirm that Mesopotamian figurines were sometimes made from clay for ritual, household, or symbolic purposes. Archaeologists have found small clay images of humans and animals in many ancient contexts, though their meanings vary greatly. Thus, some may represent offerings, charms, toys, teaching tools, or ritual objects. Research from the University of Chicago has emphasized caution when interpreting them, because the same material object can serve different functions depending on place and use. Still, clay figures invite reflection. A small body shaped by hand can feel like a prayer, or a substitute, or a memory, or a rehearsal of creation itself. A person making a figure from mud repeats, in miniature. The imagined work of the gods, the act is humble, almost domestic, yet it touches the deepest question. What is a human being made from, and who gets to decide what that human being owes? The potter's wheel turns, a vessel rises. Your mind drifts towards the first human figure in the old stories, not as a single named person, but as a type of being, new, damp, breathing, placed under an immense sky. Around that figure are rivers, reeds, animals, gods, and the unfinished machinery of civilization. There are no polished philosophies yet, no grand libraries, no modern declarations of individual destiny. There is only the clay body and the task. The task comes quickly. Clear the channel, bring the offering, grind the grain, build the wall, sing the hymn, remember the names, produce children, endure the seasons, die properly if possible. Though no one finds that convenient, humanity is created into obligation, and obligation becomes the foundation of society. In this sense, the myth is not separate from social history. It is social history spoken in sacred language. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to the clay creation theme. Some modern interpreters claim these stories preserve distorted memories of ancient biological engineering, as if the gods shaped humans through hidden science. They point to the mixing of divine essence and earthly material as symbolic evidence. Mainstream historians do not accept that claim. The texts belong to myth, theology, and ancient reflections on labour. Yet the idea keeps returning because the stories describe human origins as deliberate, crafted, and purposeful. That's enough to unsettle the imagination. Not random birth. Designed so... A more careful interpretation may be even more haunting than the fringe one. Ancient people looked at their own societies, saw labour, hierarchy, dependence, and mortality, then projected those realities into the dawn of existence. They asked why life is heavy. Their answer was not that something had gone wrong accidentally. Their answer was that life was arranged this way. You sit with that in the lamplight. The clay cools against the hand. Its surface takes any mark pressed into it. That quality is central. Clay can become a brick, a bowl, a tablet, a seal, a figurine, or a body in myth. It receives shape from pressure. Human life in the Sumerian imagination also receives shape from pressure. Rivers press, temples press, gods press, hunger presses, memory presses. The result is civilization. The scholarly conversation can caboose around these creation accounts. Some researchers emphasize their connection to ritual and temple ideology. Others focus on the psychological meaning of humans as mixed beings, half earth and half divine service. Some compare Mesopotamian clay creation motifs with later traditions from neighbouring cultures, while warning against flattening them into one simple story. The richest readings leave room for many layers, because ancient clay holds impressions from many hands. Outside, the night grows quieter. The potter removes the finished vessel and sets it aside to dry. Oh yeah, it is fragile now. It must harden. Too much heat too soon could crack it. Too little care could deform it. The same could be said of cities, perhaps, and of people, and of memory. Everything shaped from clay must pass through danger before it endures. The old creation story does not give you comfort without shadow. It tells you that humanity is close to the earth, close to the gods, and close to labour. It makes the human body part of the same world as the tablet that records its duties. It suggests that the first people were not merely born into history, they were pressed into it. And in the soft dark where lamp smoke curls against the ceiling, you begin to sense that the event history tried to erase may not be only a disaster behind the world. It may also be the moment when people first understood themselves as made things, burdened things, clay things, cruces, carrying the marks of hands they could never fully see. The archive room is cooler than the street, as though names themselves have lowered the temperature. You stand beneath a roof of reeds and timber, where clay tablets rest on shelves, in baskets, and inside storage jars sealed against dust. Some are large enough to feel important, others are small, plain, and easy to overlook. Yet together they create a second city inside the first. A city made not from walls and canals, but from lists, names of gods, names of cities, names of professions, names of offerings, and names of stars, names of rulers whose bodies have become less substantial than the signs that preserve them. There is a special kind of power in a list. It does not argue, it arranges. Sumerian scribes loved lists with an intensity that can feel almost suspicious. They wrote lexical lists to organize the world into categories, placing animals, plants, stones, officials, tools, divine names, and places into sequences that students could copy and scholars could preserve. Records confirm that such lists are among the earliest and most widespread forms of Mesopotamian writing. They were used for education, administration, and learned tradition. Scholars at Yale and the University of Chicago have studied them as keys to how ancient scribes ordered knowledge. The fact seems dry at first. Then it becomes stranger. A list is not merely a tool for remembering. It is a way of deciding what belongs beside what. It places the world into columns, and columns become a kind of silent philosophy. If a god's name is grouped with certain titles, that god acquires shape. If a city appears in a sacred sequence, the city gains meaning beyond its streets. If a profession is written beside others, labour itself becomes part of a system. The list does not simply store reality, it edits reality into pattern. You lean closer to a tablet filled with divine names. The signs are pressed in neat rows, each one carrying a presence that once had hymns, offerings, and perhaps a temple courtyard filled with smoke. Some names are famous in later traditions, others are obscure, attached to local shrines, forgotten functions, or older layers of belief. A name may belong to a river god, a gatekeeper of the unseen world, a divine scribe, a mother figure, a warlike power, or a being whose role is now uncertain. The clay keeps the name even when the story has faded. That is unsettling. The name survives the memory. You feel the archive breathe in fragments. A god appears with a title but no myth. A city appears with a divine patron but no surviving wall. An office appears, important enough to list, but its duties have dissolved into scholarly argument. The world of Sumer is not preserved whole. It is preserved as a patterned ruin. The lists offer structure, while also reminding you how much structure can remain after meaning has leaked away. A lamp flame bends near the doorway. Outside, the market continues. Inside, more. The scribal mind gathers creation into order. There are lists of deities that suggest divine households, councils, attendants and spouses, children and officials. The gods themselves appear bureaucratic, which is both grand and faintly funny. Even heaven seems to require staff. Somewhere in the unseen administration, one imagines a divine clerk sighing over a badly sealed jar. Eternity has paperwork too. The mainstream historical fact remains important here. Mesopotamian pantheons were not random collections of supernatural figures. They were organised through kinship, rank, city patronage, function, and literary tradition. Major research from Oxford and Cambridge has emphasised that divine lists helped scholars map relationships among gods and integrate local traditions into wider theological systems. This means the archive was not passive. It actively built a shared sacred order from many older parts. The hidden timeline appears through that order. It's not a straight line of events. It is a network. Cities, gods, offices, rituals, and stories all connect. A city does not simply exist on the plane. It belongs to a god. A god belongs within a family or council. A temple belongs within a ritual calendar. A king belongs to divine favour. A worker belongs to temple economy. Humanity belongs to labour and offering. Everything is placed somewhere. Nothing important is allowed to drift. Perhaps this is how society rebuilds after rupture. It names everything. It gives every power a title, every place a patron, every duty a line in the tablet. To modern ears, that may sound obsessive. To an ancient city facing floods, famine, rivalry, disease, and shifting rivers, it may sound like survival. If the world can be named, perhaps it can be held. If powers can be listed, perhaps they can be honoured in the right order. If memory can be copied, perhaps loss can be slowed. Your fingertips hover above the tablet, not touching. The signs are too fragile in the imagination, though real museum tablets have endured more than any hand should ask. Each wedge was once pressed while the clay was damp. Each name required intention. A scribe had to know not only how to write, but where the name belonged. Wrong placement should mean ignorance. In sacred matters, ignorance was not charming. A quirky fringe tidbit gathers round these divine lists. Some modern writers claim the long ranks of gods and attendants conceal records of non-human castes, ancient administrators, or visitors arranged in command structures. They read the pantheon, an organisational chart from a lost technology. Mainstream historians do not accept that interpretation. Divine lists are products of religious scholarship, local cults, and scribal education. Still, the comparison is tempting because the lists genuinely do feel like systems of authority. You can reject the wild claim. You can still notice the architecture. The Sumerian sacred world is carefully built. It contains layers of rank, function, location, and inheritance. It feels older than any single tablet because each tablet seems to preserve only a slice. The gods are not introduced as newly invented. They arrive already surrounded by titles. The cities are not blank spaces. They appear as nodes in a sacred geography. The offices are not explained from the beginning. They are assumed, which may be the quietest signal of antiquity. Assumption is a fossil of habit. When a text assumes you already know, it reveals a world behind the text. That world may be only decades older, or centuries, or woven from traditions no one can date cleanly. The open scholarly debate concerns how these divine and lexical lists developed over time. Some researchers see them as school tools that gradually became vehicles of sophisticated theology. Others argue that they preserve older local traditions later arranged into scholarly order. A careful view allows both possibilities, since scribes were perfectly capable of being practical and profound at once. The archive room deepens. A tablet of city names rests beside a list of gods. Another tablet records temple personnel, another counts offerings for a festival. You begin to feel that the Sumerian world is not a collection of separate stories, but an immense structure reconstructed from fragments. The hidden record is not one forbidden book, it is a pattern scattered across ordinary writing. A city name here, a divine title there. A strange office in a list, a ritual duty without explanation. Each fragment seems small, yet together they suggest a civilization convinced that order had been given, received, maintained, and threatened. The scribes do not write as if they are inventing order from nothing. They write as if they are preserving an inherited arrangement. Whether that inheritance came from ancestors, institutions, landscape, or the imagined will of gods, it is treated with care. You hear the quiet scrape of tablets being moved. A scribe sorts them by subject, another checks a seal. A student whispers signs under his breath, trying not to forget a difficult name. The name belongs to a minor god, perhaps a figure almost lost now. Yet in that moment the student's memory gives the god another breath. Small, yes, but survival is often small. The hidden names do not shout. They accumulate. They show you a world where identity depends on being placed within a greater order. A god without a list can fade. A city without a patron can seem unmoored. A worker without a tablet may be denied rations, which is a very direct theological problem if dinner is involved. Writing binds the visible and invisible worlds together, thread by thread, sign by sign. Perhaps that is why these tablets feel secret, even when they are not. They reveal the scaffolding behind belief. They show that Sumerian memory was not only narrative, but structural. Beneath the flood, the kings, the creation of humanity, and the labour of temples lies a vast arrangement of names. The event history softened or buried may have survived because its consequences required organisation. After disorder, name, after loss, list after fear, system. The lamp burns lower. The archive remains still. In the cooling room, clay tablets hold the names of powers no living mouth now worships in the old way. Some names are understood. Others wait behind broken signs and uncertain readings, yet each one is a tiny door in the dark, opening onto a world where nothing was merely itself. Every city had a shadow. Every office had a place. Every human task belonged to a pattern older than the worker performing it. And somewhere among those hidden names, the erased event leaves no single confession, only the outline of a world rebuilt through classification, as if the scribes believed that to name the pieces carefully enough was to keep the ancient silence from swallowing them again. The night sky opens above the temple roof like a dark river turned upside down. You stand on a high platform where the city has softened below you into shadow. Smoke and scattered lamps. The streets are narrow black threads. The canals catch faint pieces of starlight. Far away. Dogs bark once, then grow quiet. Above everything, the heavens appear immense and ordered, as though someone has stretched a woven cloth across eternity and pierced it with careful fire. The air is cooler up here. It smells of brick dust, lamp oil, and the faint sweetness of date palms beyond the walls. A priest or scholar watches the horizon with patient attention. He is wrapped in a plain garment. Not because the universe requires fashion, thankfully, but because the nightwork asks for stillness. He knows where certain stars should rise. He knows the moon's changing fate. He knows the season when a star returns before dawn, bringing meaning to fields, rituals, and calendars. In Mesopotamia, the sky was not empty decoration. It was a text. Records confirm that Mesopotamian scholars developed long traditions of astronomical observation and celestial omen interpretation. Later Babylonian astronomy became extraordinarily sophisticated, but its roots lay in much older habits of watching the heavens from temple cities. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have described this sky watching as both religious and practical. The movement of stars, planets, and the moon helped shape ritual timing, agricultural expectation, royal anxiety, and the interpretation of divine will. You look upward, and the stars seem almost too steady. Down below, rivers wander, fields fail, cities quarrel, kings die with embarrassing regularity. Despite their inscriptions, but above, the lights return in patterns. The moon thins, vanishes, and swells again. Certain stars rise with the seasons. The planet Venus appears as morning brilliance or evening beauty, changing places like a messenger who refuses to stay politely in one office. Ancient people noticed. Of course they noticed. In a world without electric glare, the sky was intimate. It lived over every roof, every canal bank, every field, every funeral. Night did not hide the heavens. Night revealed them. The watcher on the temple platform did not need modern instruments to feel the sky's authority. He needed memory, discipline, and enough patience to stand awake while most sensible people slept. You hear the soft tap of a stylus on a celly. Observations may be recorded. Omens may be consulted. A crescent seen at a certain time might matter. An eclipse could trouble a king. An unusual appearance in the heavens could be read as a message, warning, or confirmation. This does not mean ancient observers were foolish. It means they lived in a universe where meaning and movement were not separated. The sky did not merely move, it spoke through movement. A modern person might call that superstition. A sleepy ancient scholar might call modern life rude. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Mesopotamian astronomical texts, especially from later periods, preserve careful records of lunar and planetary phenomena. Journals such as Science and Nature have discussed how ancient observational traditions contributed to the history of astronomy. But in the Sumerian world and its later inheritance, celestial knowledge was not isolated from theology. The heavens belonged to divine order, and divine order touched kingship, weather, fertility, war and fate. And the temple itself may participate in that order. Some Sumerian temples and sacred precincts were oriented with attention to cardinal directions, local topography, ritual movement, or celestial events. Though scholars are cautious about claiming exact astronomical alignments without evidence, the built environment often placed human space into conversation with cosmic space. A doorway, platform, courtyard, or processional route could make the city feel aligned with powers greater than itself. You stand near the edge of the roof and feel the brick under bare feet. The surface still holds some warmth from the day. A breeze moves over your face from the river plain. Somewhere below, a kiln cools. Somewhere beyond the city, marsh birds stir in their sleep. The watcher lifts his gaze toward a bright point near the horizon. He does not call it a planet in the modern scientific sense, but he knows its habits. He has inherited names, omens, tables, and traditions from those who watched before him. The sky becomes memory without clay. It returns by itself. That matters to the hidden timeline. If floods erase walls and wars break tablets, the heavens still repeat their signs. A society shaken by disaster may look upward for continuity. The stars offer a pattern not easily washed away. They suggest that above human loss, there is a structure still functioning. The city may fall, but the moon will return. The king may fail, but Venus will appear where tradition expects her. Perhaps this is why celestial order and earthly order become linked. A good king maintains justice below, while the gods maintain rhythm above. A temple anchors the city between earth and sky. A ritual at the correct time does not merely honour a god, it places human action inside a larger pattern. In this sense, the calendar is not only a convenience, it is a bridge. A quirky fringe tidbit often grows around Sumerian sky watching. Some modern writers claim the Sumerians possessed advanced astronomical knowledge given by non-human teachers, pointing to later Mesopotamian star lists and planetary omens as proof of hidden science. Mainstream scholars do not accept those claims. The evidence shows long observation, intellectual discipline, and gradual development across centuries. Yet the fascination exists because the ancient sky records are genuinely impressive. Slow human patience can look like magic when viewed from a hurried age. That is worth remembering. Not all mystery needs a spaceship. Sometimes it needs a quiet scholar and many cold nights. The open scholarly debate concerns how early celestial observation became formal astronomical scholarship. Some specialists emphasize practical needs, such as calendars and agricultural seasons. Others highlight divination, royal decision-making, and temple ritual as major engines of observation. Another view sees the scholarly tradition as a gradual fusion of numerical skill, omen lore, and institutional record-keeping. The precise balance remains debated, especially for the earliest periods where evidence is thinner. You let the debate hang beneath the stars. The temple watcher sees more than points of light. He sees divine roots, warnings, cycles, and perhaps reassurance. He sees that the world above is not chaotic. For a civilization haunted by water, soil, labour, and fragile walls, that steadiness matters. The sky becomes a ceiling of order over a floor of mud. Your mind drifts into a night procession. Priests carry offerings. A singer's voice rises softly from the courtyard. Incense smoke climbs, breaks, and vanishes before reaching the stars. The smell is sharp and resinous, mingling with wax and wool. The city listens from its doorways, not fully awake, not fully asleep. Above, the moon rests like a polished shard. Below, human beings perform their small, precise acts, hoping precision has meaning, and perhaps it does. Even if the gods are mythic forms, the ritual still organizes fear, even if omens are not messages in the modern sense. Observation still creates knowledge, even if temple alignments are not always astronomical. Sacred architecture still teaches people that their city belongs within a larger order. The Sumerian world is not naive. It is deeply structured, and the sky is one of its oldest structures. The event history tried to soften may have left people searching for reliable signs. Water can betray, kings can boast, walls can crumble, but the sky returns with terrible calm. It offers cycles of disappearance and return, with darkness and brightness, loss and renewal. A flood story tells of destruction and survival. A star cycle quietly enacts return every season. The heavens become a gentler version of catastrophe, reminding the watcher that absence is not always the end. The platform grows colder. The city breathes beneath you. The scholar marks a sign, pauses, and looks again. He's not solving the universe. He's listening to its rhythm through bite, number, and inherited belief. Every observation joins a chain of watchers, each adding a little certainty to a world that remains uncertain. Their work is slow, unglamorous, and patient enough to embarrass modern attention spans. Above you, the stars do not They never have. They simply move in patterns ancient eyes refuse to ignore, and in that silence, The Sumerian record widens beyond tablets and buried walls. It reaches upward into the measured dark, where people tried to read the first and oldest archive of all, hoping that the same heavens that watched the erased event might still remember its shape in light. The marsh opens before you in pale morning light, wide, breathing and full of hidden movement. Water lies everywhere, broken by reed beds, mud islands, bird tracks, and narrow channels that twist away into silver distance. The air smells green and damp, touched with fish, clay, and there's a faint sweetness of flowering plants along the bank. Insects shimmer above still pools. A heron stands motionless near the reeds, as if it has been appointed guardian of a world not yet ready for people. Then, beyond the water, you see the mound. Eridu rises low and ancient from the plain, not as a glittering capital, but as a threshold. Its shape is softened by centuries of ruined brick and wind. It does not overwhelm the eye at first. That is part of its power. Some places do not announce themselves loudly. They wait until you understand where you are standing. In Sumerian tradition, Eridu was among the oldest and most sacred cities. The Sumerian king list places it at the beginning, where kingship first descends from heaven. Archaeology confirms that Eridu was occupied very early, with temple levels reaching back into the 6th millennium before the Common Era. Excavations revealed a long sequence of sanctuaries built and rebuilt on the same sacred spot. Scholars at major institutions, including the University of Chicago and Oxford, have treated Eridu as central to understanding early southern Mesopotamian religion. The fact is quiet but immense. A sacred place was renewed for thousands of years. You approach through damp ground where reeds brush your legs and mud grips your sandals. The city seems to grow from water rather than land. This matters, because Eridu was associated with Enki, the god of wisdom, fresh water, craft, and deep-hidden waters. In the ancient imagination, the freshwater deep was not merely a source of canals, it was a sacred underground reservoir, a place of potency, knowledge, and creation. The city stands at the edge of that idea. Stone is rare here, so holiness is made from mud brick, plaster, repetition, and memory. The earliest shrines are small by later standards, a room, an altar, a careful layout, then another shrine rises above it, larger or altered, but still tied to the same place. Layer by layer, devotion becomes architecture. The floor beneath your feet is not just earth, it is accumulated reverence. You hear water moving somewhere nearby. It is not dramatic, it is patient. The temple sequence at Eridu suggests a remarkable continuity of sacred activity. Though scholars debate how the meanings of those buildings changed across time, some see the long sequence as evidence for a persistent cult center. Others warn that architectural continuity does not always mean identical belief. A shrine may be rebuilt in the same place while rituals and communities and divine association shift over centuries. That debate matters because ancient places are never motionless, even when later tradition makes them seem fixed. Your mind drifts into one of the early sanctuaries. The room is dim, with a packed floor and simple offering place. There may be fish bones, ash, pottery, and traces of meals given to the divine. No gold throne waits there, no vast statue gleams in candlelight. The sacred begins humbly, with food, gesture, and place. A person brings something from the watery world outside and sets it before a presence that cannot be seen. That is how a threshold forms, not by spectacle, by return. People come back again and again, they rebuild after decay, they repair after damage, they cover an old floor and make a new one. Each act says the same thing in mud brick language. This place matters, this place still opens, this place remembers the first agreement between people, water, and the powers beneath creation. A quirky fringe tidbit often surrounds Eridu because of its extreme antiquity and sacred status. Some modern writers call it the city of ancient teachers, imagining Enki as a memory of mysterious instructors who gave civilization to humanity. They point to its position as first city in tradition and its association with wisdom. Mainstream historians do not accept that as evidence of hidden visitors or lost masters, yet the fascination is easy to understand. Eridu does feel like a beginning that refuses to become ordinary. It's too old to feel level. The marsh itself strengthens the mood. In many creation stories from river cultures, life emerges from water, mud, darkness, or a fertile deep. Eridu belongs to that emotional geography. Its sacred power does not come from height alone, although later temple platforms rise impressively. It comes from contact with the watery source, the place where land is still being born. Here, creation is not ancient in the sense of finished. It is ongoing, bubbling at the edge of the reeds. You watch a fisherman guide a narrow boat along a channel. His pole sinks into soft bottom. Water closes around it with a small sucking sound. A basket of fish rests near his feet, silver bodies glinting. He knows the marsh by sight, smell, and current. He knows where reeds hide birds, where mud will swallow a careless step, and where water remains sweet. To him, wisdom is not abstract. It is survival practiced until it becomes instinct. That too belongs to Enki's world. Wisdom is craft. Wisdom is water management. Wisdom is knowing how not to drown in a land that feeds you. Records from early Mesopotamian settlements show that communities depended on skilled adaptation to wetlands, rivers, and irrigation zones. The sacred prestige of Eridu may reflect this deep relationship between water and civilization. Scholars continue to debate how much its later mythic importance reflects real early political influence, religious memory, or retrospective theological elevation. Some argue that Eridu's ancient shrine sequence gave later scribes a powerful symbol of origins. Others see its first place in tradition as more literary than political. The uncertainty does not weaken Eridu. It deepens it, because origins are rarely simple facts. They're chosen, remembered, polished, and placed at the beginning of stories. A city may become first not only because it was old, but because later people needed an old place to stand at the dawn of order. Eridu offered everything such a memory acquired: antiquity, water, wisdom, a god of hidden depths, temples stacked over temples, like thought returning to the same question. You climb the mound in imagination as evening approaches. The marsh behind you turns copper under the falling sun. Reeds whisper, birds wheel in dark groups across the sky. The temple platform catches the last light. From above, the city does not look like a conquest of nature. It looks like a negotiation with it. Mud brick rises from mud. Ritual rises from need. History rises from repeated return. At the heart of Eridu lies a threshold between human order and the deep. The deep is not only water, it is everything hidden beneath ordinary life. It is memory before writing, sacred authority before kingship, and knowledge before explanation. The Sumerians placed wisdom there, in the unseen reservoir below the world. That is not a small idea. It suggests that what sustains civilization lies beneath it, not above it alone. You feel the cool wind off the marsh. It touches your face like a warning made gentle. The city behind you is ancient, but not dead in the mind. Its old sanctuaries hold the image of people arriving with offerings, season after season, trusting that this low place of reeds and water opened onto something vast. Perhaps they came because they believed wisdom could rise from below. Perhaps they came because they feared what might happen if the deep were neglected. In that thought, the hidden record stirs. Eridu does not give a clear confession of an erased event. It gives a setting for one, a first city beside sacred water, a god who knows hidden things, a temple rebuilt so many times that memory becomes a mound, beginning that seems less like a starting line and more like a doorway. The light fades softly over the marsh. Water darkens, the reeds continue whispering, as though they have been speaking since the first brick was laid, and Eridu remains at the threshold, half city, half memory, keeping watch over the place where civilization first looked into the deep and decided to build beside it. The road to Nippur feels different, quieter, as though the plain itself lowers its voice. You move across a landscape of pale soil, cut by old channels and scattered with the softened shapes of abandoned mounds. The day is warm, but not cruel. A thin wind carries dust along the ground in slow veils. In the distance, the city appears not as a sudden vision, but as a gathering of walls, temple platforms and storage courts and sacred boundaries. Nippur does not need to glitter. It has authority of a deeper kind. Some cities rule through armies. Nippur rules through recognition. In ancient Sumer, Nippur was not usually the greatest political capital in the simple sense. Its power was more sacred, more enduring, and perhaps more mysterious. It was the city of Enlil, the great lord whose command carried immense weight in the Mesopotamian divine order. Kings from different cities sought legitimacy through Nippur's religious prestige. To be acknowledged there was to stand closer to cosmic approval, very convenient, of course, for rulers who preferred their ambitions wrapped in holiness. Records confirm that Nippur was one of the major religious centers of ancient Mesopotamia. Excavations by the University of Pennsylvania uncovered temples, administrative archives, school tablets, and long occupation layers that made the site essential for understanding Sumerian culture. The sacred precinct of Enlil, especially the Ekur temple complex, held enormous importance in tradition and ritual. Scholars at Yale and Oxford have often emphasized Nippur's role as a religious and scribal center where memory, legitimacy, and learning gathered together. You enter through an imagined gate at first light. The city is already awake, but its sound is ordered. Donkeys pass under loads. Priests move towards the temple courts. Workers carry baskets of grain. Scribes walk with tablets protected in cloth. The smell of baked bread rises from ovens near domestic lanes, mixing with incense drifting from the sacred quarter. Somewhere, metal taps against stone. Somewhere, a teacher corrects a student with the ancient tenderness of impatience. Nippur feels less like a throne room than an archive with beautiful walls. Its power comes from accumulation. The Temple of Enlil stands at the center of this feeling. Enlil is not a simple figure of weather or sky alone. He is authority, command, order, and divine decree. In many Mesopotamian traditions, he grants kingship, confirms destiny, and presides over decisions that shape the human world. If Eridu suggests hidden wisdom in the deep, Nippur suggests decree spoken from the center. The two ideas form a tension: wisdom beneath, command above, humanity somewhere between them, trying not to misplace the grain accounts. You pause before the temple precinct. Walls enclose sacred space, but they also organize attention. Courtyards lead inward. Doorways control movement. Offerings pass through proper routes. Ritual is never random here. It is choreography for an anxious universe. People approach the divine not by wandering freely, but by following the inherited order. That order teaches the body what the mind may not fully understand. Step here. Wait there. Speak carefully. The sensory world grows dense near the sanctuary. There is warm plaster beneath the hand. There is wool brushed against skin. There is the grainy smell of old brick, the sweetness of dates, the bitter curl of incense, and the faint animal heat of offerings brought into temple space. You hear sandals scuff on packed floors. You hear a low chant, not loud, not theatrical, but steady enough to fill the chest. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene. Nippur produced many tablets that helped modern scholars reconstruct Sumerian literature, language, and religion. School texts from the site preserve hymns, lexical lists, myths, proverbs, and scribal exercises. Without Nippur's archives, the modern understanding of Sumerian intellectual life would be far thinner. The city became, in effect, one of the great memory chambers of early civilization. But memory here is not neutral. It serves order. A text copied in Nippur does not float outside power. It belongs to a sacred city where divine authority legitimates human authority. A hymn praises a god, a list organizes knowledge, a royal inscription seeks favor, a school tablet trains a mind to inherit tradition. Together, they form a system where learning and devotion are intertwined. The scribal student is not merely learning signs, he is entering a hierarchy of meaning. You imagine such a student under a shaded roof. He presses signs into clay while flies orbit his concentration with unnecessary enthusiasm. His teacher recites old lines, divine names, city names, model phrases. The student repeats them, badly at first, then better. Perhaps he does not feel that he is carrying civilization. Perhaps he mostly feels tired. Yet his small tablet may preserve a hymn older than his family, older than his city's current ruler, older than the political quarrels outside the school door. This is how Nippur becomes powerful. It trains memory to continue. A quirky fringe tidbit often attaches to Nippur's sacred authority. Some modern enthusiasts imagine hidden priestly archives beneath the temple, containing lost records of pre-flood kings or secret decrees from the gods. There is no solid archaeological evidence for such a dramatic underground library. Yet the idea grows naturally from Nippur's real role as a sacred and scholarly centre. When a city preserves so many tablets, the imagination starts asking what else might still be buried. It is nosy but understandable. The more careful mystery is stronger. Why did so many traditions gather here? The open scholarly debate concerns how Nippur maintained religious importance across shifting political landscapes. Some researchers argue that its sanctity gave rival rulers a shared source of legitimacy. Others emphasize its scribal schools and temple institutions as engines of cultural continuity. Some view Nippur as a symbolic centre, more powerful in ideology than in military force. These interpretations do not cancel one another. Sacred authority often survives precisely because it can serve many rulers without belonging fully to any single one. That makes Nippur unsettling in a calm way. Political capitals rise and fall. Nippur endures as a place where kings come to be made meaningful. It is less like a sword and more like a seal. The seal does not fight. It confirms. It stamps authority onto clay, and the clay carries that approval outward. In a world of competing cities, such symbolic power matters as much as walls. You walk along a lane near the temple district. A woman carries a basket of bread toward a courtyard. A boy leads sheep by a rope. A scribe emerges from a doorway, holding a tablet carefully, as if it contains notations more delicate than its mud surface suggests. The city's ordinary life continues around sacred prestige. No one can live entirely inside grandeur. Someone still has to clean floors, bake bread, and deal with sheep behaving like sheep, which is rarely theological but often urgent. Yet ordinary labour in Nippur is shaded by Enlil's presence. The city's rituals help maintain divine order. Its scholars preserve inherited lines. Its temple confirms the relation between heaven and kingship. If a hidden event once fractured memory, Nippur represents the response of authority. It gathers fragments, ranks them, teaches them, and places them under decree. It does not ask whether the world is fragile. It assumes fragility, then builds order around it. Perhaps that is why its silence feels so firm. Nippur does not whisper like a marsh threshold. It settles like a verdict. The old records tied to this city do not merely remember gods and kings, They demonstrate how memory becomes official. A story copied in a school gains form, a ritual repeated in a temple gains weight, a ruler blessed in sacred space gains legitimacy. The past is not only preserved, it is authorized. Even the dust seems disciplined here. As evening draws close, the temple walls turn amber under the sinking sun, shadows lengthen across the courtyard. The day's tablets are set aside to dry. A seal impression hardens on a lump of clay. Somewhere, a hymn continues in a low voice, nearly blending with the wind. You feel that the city is less interested in explaining itself than in continuing itself. That too is a kind of answer. Nippur's quiet authority shows how a civilization survives rupture by creating centres that outlast kings, not centres of mere force, but centres of recognition, repetition, and sacred memory. In such a place, an erased event would not need to be named plainly every day. It could live beneath rituals, beneath lists, beneath the very idea that kingship must be granted, renewed, and placed under divine command. The last light fades from the temple wall. The city cools, and Nippur remains in the mind like a sealed tablet. Calm on the surface, heavy with decrees, keeping the ancient order steady enough for human sleep, yet never fully revealing what fear first made such steadiness necessary. The ground looks ordinary until someone cuts into it and the buried line appears. You stand at an excavation trench at noon, with light pouring straight down onto the exposed wall of earth. The layers run across the section in bands of brown, grey, ash, yellow clay, and pale silt. At first they seem quiet, almost dull. Then the eye begins to understand. This is not dirt. This is time sliced open. Every layer is a condition of life, or every change in colour is a sentence. No one finished speaking. A thin band of flood silt crosses the trench like a scar. It is not loud. It does not need to be. The event beneath the myth may be hidden in marks like this, in sediments, abandoned rooms, broken tablets, changed settlements, patterns, and stories repeated long after their first terror dissolved. Ancient people did not separate natural disaster, divine anger, political crisis, and moral meaning as neatly as modern categories prefer. A river flood could become a judgment. A collapse in authority could become a cosmic withdrawal. A famine could become a sign that the divine order had been disturbed. Modern archaeology makes the question sharper, not easier. Excavations at Mesopotamian sites have found flood deposits in certain places, including layers at Shuruppak, Kish, and Ur, though they do not represent one universal flood across all of Mesopotamia. Research discussed by scholars from the University of Pennsylvania, Oxford, and other major institutions has treated these deposits with caution. They show that serious flooding happened in some cities. They do not prove that every flood tradition records one single physical event. That is where the mystery becomes more believable, not less, because cultural memory rarely behaves like a measuring rod. It compresses, it selects, it magnifies, it turns many wounds into one story when one story can carry more meaning than a scattered archive of separate misfortunes. A people who endured repeated river disasters might remember them as the flood. A city destroyed by water might become, in tradition, the whole world drowned. This is not lying. It is memory doing its ancient work with the tools it has. You crouch beside the trench wall. The silt is fine between the fingers, powdery when dry, smooth where damp. It once moved as water burdened with river mud. It entered streets, rooms, courtyards, and storage spaces. It covered surfaces people had swept. It filled spaces people had named. Then it settled. When the water withdrew, the layer remained, flat and indifferent, waiting thousands of years for a trowel to uncover it. The physical evidence asks one kind of question. The myth asks another. A mainstream historical fact stands firmly in the dust. Mesopotamia's river systems were unpredictable, and early settlements depended on irrigation, embankments, drainage, and constant maintenance. Environmental instability was not background drama, it was part of daily political and economic life. Journals concerned with the archaeology and environmental science have long explored how floods, river shifts, and salinization shaped settlement across southern Iraq. You can imagine a city after such a disaster. The water has withdrawn, but the problem remains. Walls slump, stored grain rots, wells are fouled, irrigation channels are blocked, fields are buried under silt in some places and stripped in others. Dead animals must be dragged away, families count who is missing. Officials argue over ration distribution because apparently even catastrophe must pass through administration. Someone asks why. That question changes everything. A purely physical flood can destroy houses. A meaningful flood can reorder civilization. It can explain why kingship had to descend again. It can explain why humans must serve more carefully. It can explain why rituals matter. It can warn cities that noise, neglect, arrogance, or disorder may invite consequences too large for walls. The event beneath the myth may therefore be double. It may be water in the streets. It may be fear in the memory. A quirky fringe tidbit often appears at this point. Some modern writers argue that the flood stories preserve evidence of a lost global civilization wiped away before history began. They connect Mesopotamian texts with traditions from many parts of the world and imagine a forgotten age beneath all later cultures. Mainstream scholars remain cautious, since similar flood stories can arise independently in societies living near rivers, coasts, and lakes. Still, the attraction is understandable. Water is universal and loss often sounds familiar across continents. Yet the Sumerian material has its own voice. It is not merely one more flood story. It belongs to a landscape where water controlled survival, where cities rose from mud, where divine order was imagined through authority and labour, and where writing could preserve rupture across centuries. The local setting gives the story its particular weight. The flood is not only an event, it is an explanation of why the world must be managed. You look across the plain beyond the trench. Heat shimmers above the ground. The horizon is low and almost empty. It is difficult to imagine water covering everything from here to the edge of sight. Yet that difficulty may be modern comfort speaking. The river plain is deceptive. Slight changes in height can decide life and death. A levee breach, a channel shift, or a season of unusual flow can transform the map. To a person standing inside the danger, the disaster is not local, it is tool. Your world is the world you can lose. When the city floods, the world floods. The open scholarly debate lies between event, pattern, and narrative. Some specialists seek historical kernels behind the flood stories, identifying possible severe inundations that entered communal memory. Others emphasize that the flood functions as a literary boundary between primeval and historical time. Still others focus on divine justice, human limitation, and the politics of renewal. The strongest readings do not force one answer. They allow the myth to carry physical memory, social anxiety, and theological structure at once. That layered reading feels fitting. The trench itself teaches layers. A burned band may mark conflict, accident, or ritual clearing. A silt band may mark flood, channel activity, or deliberate fill. A rebuilding layer may mark recovery, power, or simple necessity. Nothing in the earth arrives with a polite label. Archaeologists infer from context, and context is often damaged. The past does not refuse explanation, it simply charges a high price for it. You hear wind move over the excavation. Canvas flaps against a pole, a worker's shovel rings lightly against buried pottery. Somewhere, a notebook page turns. The scene is modern and ancient at once. A scholar measures the layer, a photographer records it, A specialist may later analyse soil composition, ceramic type, plant remains, or radiocarbon dates from nearby material. The methods are careful, controlled, and patient. Then the myth waits beside them like a shadow. No measurement can fully tell you what the flood meant to those who remembered it. A silt layer may show water. It cannot show dread. It cannot show a priest interpreting disaster, a family leaving a ruined house, a ruler claiming restoration, or a scribe centuries later copying a line about divine decision with hands that never touched the original mud. That is the divide between evidence and memory. Both matter. You stand there as the light lowers and the trench wall glows warmly. The scar of silt becomes less visible, then strangely more present. Like a thought returning in darkness. It may represent one local inundation. It may be unrelated to the specific mythic account. It may be one physical cousin among many disasters that fed the larger tradition. Honest uncertainty remains essential, even when the atmosphere tempts you toward grand answers. Perhaps the erased event was not erased by enemies. Perhaps it was blurred by survival. People rebuilt, children were born, ration lists resumed, temples opened, kings announced order. Over time, the raw details became less useful than the meaning. The broken houses faded from speech. While the great flood remained, the mud on the floor became the waters sent by heaven. The lost neighborhood became the drowned world. The survivor became the keeper of continuity. That is not a failure of Ero. Memory, it is memory becoming sapid. The trench grows cool, shadows fill the lower layers. The exposed earth waits without impatience, holding flood, ash, floor, and foundation in their compressed silence. You leave the scar where it lies, not solved, not dismissed. It is enough to know that beneath the myth there may be water. Beneath the water there may be fear. And beneath the fear there may be the oldest human knowledge of all. The world can end, Luke. Lee. Then the story can grow large enough to carry it. The old words do not remain untouched once new kings learn their usefulness. You enter a court where the walls are brighter, the seals more formal, and the language of power has changed. Sumerian still carries sacred weight. But Akkadian voices move through the palace halls. Messengers arrive with tablets in leather pouches. Officials press slender seals across damp clay. Soldiers stand near gateways, trying to look permanent, which is always ambitious beside mud brick walls and human history. Here, memory becomes policy. A story copied in a temple school can become a royal tool. A myth about kingship descending from heaven can serve a ruler who wishes everyone to notice his excellent relationship with heaven. A flood tradition can become a lesson about divine favour, survival, and legitimacy. A list of ancient cities can be arranged to imply continuity. Later empires do not merely inherit old Sumerian records, they polish them, translate them, expand them, and sometimes quietly bend them toward their own needs. This is not unusual. Power has always enjoyed editing. Records confirm that later Mesopotamian civilizations, including Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian cultures, preserved and reworked older Sumerian traditions. Sumerian became a language of scholarship and religion long after it faded as an everyday spoken language. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have described this as a major feature of Mesopotamian intellectual life. The old language became prestigious, like a sacred archive that later scribes could enter with training, reverence, and occasionally a ruler looking over their shoulder. You stand beside a scribe working in a palace archive. His tablet is larger than a student exercise. The terracotta clay surface has been smoothed carefully, and his signs are confident. He may copy an older hymn, adapt an ancient myth, or record a royal inscription that borrows the dignity of primeval time. Around him, baskets hold correspondence, legal records, omen texts, lexical lists, and traditions reaching back into Sumerian memory. The room smells of clay, wool cord, oil lamps, and authority. Authority has a scent. It is mostly dust and pressure. The Akkadian Empire, associated with Sargon and his successors, brought new political scale to Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. Its rulers governed across many city traditions, languages, and sacred loyalties. In such a world, older Sumerian ideas about kingship, divine favour, and city order could be extremely valuable. A king ruling many places needs a story larger than one city. He needs history to look like destiny, preferably with his own seal impression attached. A mainstream historical fact remains clear. Mesopotamian scribes transmitted Sumerian literature in later periods, especially through school traditions in the Old Babylonian Age. Many works known today survive in copies made centuries after their original composition. This means that the version preserved may reveal both an older inherited core and the concerns of later scribes. The past is present, but it is wearing later clothing. You can feel the clothing change. Older city traditions become part of wider imperial memory. Local gods are connected to larger pantheons. Primeval kings become part of universal sequences. Creation stories and flood traditions acquire broader theological shape. A ruler in Babylon or Assyria can stand within an ancient chain, not as an isolated strong man, but as the latest custodian of order. Very humble of him, naturally, nothing says humility like claiming cosmic continuity. The old event shifts under these new hands. It may grow larger, it may become more moral, it may serve different gods, it may be placed within a grander narrative of human failure, divine punishment, and renewed rule. The flood survivor becomes a figure through whom wisdom passes into later ages. The primeval kings become signs of a former world. The old Sumerian fragments are no longer only memories. They are raw material for cultural inheritance. You hear sandals in the archive corridor. A senior scholar enters and reviews a tablet. He checks names, titles, and formulae. Accuracy matters. But accuracy here means preserving tradition properly within accepted learning. It does not necessarily mean recovering the earliest possible version. The scribe's loyalty is to the living institution that uses the text, not to a modern scholar's dream of untouched origins. That is the difficult truth. Transmission preserves and transforms at once. Babylonian versions of flood traditions, including the famous accounts embedded in larger literary works, carry themes shared with older Mesopotamian material. Yet they also reflect later language, theology, and literary artistry. Assyrian royal libraries, especially the great scholarly collections of Nineveh, preserved copies of many ancient works. Without these later efforts, much older Mesopotamian tradition would be far poorer today. The empire that reshaped memory also helped it survive. That irony deserves quiet respect. The editor becomes the rescuer. The rescuer becomes the editor. A quirky fringe tidbit often appears around these later rewritings. Some modern writers claim that imperial scribes deliberately concealed the original truth about the pre-flood world, changing gods into symbols and hiding literal events under mythic language. There is no solid evidence for such a coordinated cover-up, yet later scribal adaptation is real, and that reality gives the fringe idea its faint shadow. Texts were revised, reorganized, and copied in new contexts. The question is not whether change happened, the question is what kind of change it was. A careful answer is more interesting. Later empires did not need to erase the old event completely. They could absorb it. Absorption is gentler and more effective. A troubling memory becomes part of official tradition. A local catastrophe becomes a moral story. A sacred list becomes a royal genealogy of authority. A myth of divine decision becomes proof that order always returns through kingship and temple service. This is how memory is governed. Not always with ball burning. Often with commentary, you move through the palace court at dusk. A relief on a wall shows the ruler larger than everyone else, because ancient political art was not exactly subtle. Captives, officials, gods, and royal symbols form a carefully managed scene. The image says that the king stands at the centre of order. Yet somewhere in the archive behind him, older Sumerian stories still whisper of a time when kingship itself vanished beneath water and had to descend again. That whisper is dangerous in a soft way. It reminds every empire that authority is not permanent. Even if a king claimed divine favour, the old records know that the world can be interrupted. Even if the palace organises memory, the clay remembers rupture. The imperial narrative wants continuity. The older fragments keep the seam. The open scholarly debate concerns how much later Mesopotamian literature preserves genuinely ancient Sumerian material, and how much it reflects later scribal creativity. Some researchers emphasize continuity in themes, names, and mythic structures across centuries. Others warn that later copies are not transparent windows into the earliest phases. A balanced approach treats the texts as layered works, where older memory and later interpretation cannot be separated cleanly. Layered works suit Mesopotamia. Its cities are its temples are layered. Its stories are layered too. You imagine a Babylonian student copying Sumerian lines. He may not speak naturally. He learns old signs, old names, old formulas. To him, Sumerian is prestigious, difficult, and perhaps mildly unfair, which is how students have felt about ancient languages ever since. Yet by copying those lines, he becomes a bridge. He carries forward names from a world already ancient to him. The past he preserves is not pure. But purity is not the same as truth. A river carrying silt is still a river. A story carrying later additions may still preserve an older current. The task is not to strip away every later layer with impatience, as if the first version alone mattered. The task is to listen to how each age used the memory it received. Akkadian kings sought legitimacy. Babylonian scholars sought wisdom and order. Assyrian libraries sought mastery over knowledge. Each touched the old Sumerian fragments, and each left fingerprints. Night settles over the court. Lamps are lit in the archive. The scribe smooths another tablet and begins again, pressing signs that belong to a language already ancient. Outside, the ruler's power seems firm, guarded, announced, and sealed. Inside, the older records remain quietly unruly. They allow themselves to be used, but not fully controlled. That may be their survival. The event history tried to erase did not vanish in later empires. It changed costume, it entered royal ideology, school tradition, divine lists, flood epics, and claims of restored order. Each empire made the memory more official, and therefore less raw. Yet beneath the polished version, the old unease remained. The world had once been broken. Kingship had once descended again. Human beings still served. Water still waited beyond the fields. The tablet dries in lamplight. The scribe sets it among others, and the ancient memory passes onward, altered by power, protected by power, and never completely surrendered to it. The trench begins as a rectangle of dust by stringed so on patience and human stubbornness. You stand at its edge in the heat of a modern excavation, where the ancient mound rises like a sleeping animal beneath the white sky. Workers move carefully across the surface. Buckets pass from hand to hand. A trowel flashes briefly in sunlight. Brushes touch the ground with the delicacy of someone waking a very old sleeper who may be annoyed at the interruption. The work is slow. That is the first lesson. Modern archaeology does not uncover the past like a curtain lifting in a theatre. It removes earth by degrees, records positions, studies layers, compares pottery, photographs walls, and argues politely, or not always politely, about interpretation. It is less glamorous than treasure hunting, which is unfortunate for dramatic hats, but much better for truth. A gold object can dazzle. A mud brick wall can explain how a neighbourhood lived. Across Mesopotamia, scholars, local workers, surveyors, conservators, and museum specialists have spent generations recovering the older layers of Sumerian civilization. Excavations at Nippur, Ur, Kish, Uruk, and other sites brought tablets, temples, graves, houses, tools, seals, and city plans into view. Research from major American institutions, including the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Chicago, helped shape modern understanding of early cities, writing, and sacred power. Their discoveries did not give one simple answer. They gave evidence, which is less obedient and far more valuable. You watch a worker lift a tablet fragment from compacted earth. It is small, dark and broken at one corner. At first glance, it might be mistaken for a lump of baked mud. Then the marks appear, wedges in rows, signs pressed by a hand that vanished thousands of years ago. The fragment is placed in a tray, labelled and shaded from harsh light. Its journey has changed. It is no longer buried matter, it is testimony, but testimony must be handled carefully. A tablet out of context is like a voice overheard through a wall. It may speak, but you may misunderstand where it stands in the conversation. Archaeologists therefore care about the room, the layer, the nearby pottery, the floor, the rubbish pit, the ceilings, the burned beam, and even the humble animal bone. The fragment matters more because of everything around it. The past is not only objects, it is relationships between objects. Your mind drifts into an old storeroom uncovered under collapsed brick. Rows of jars once stood there. Seal impressions may have marked ownership or control. A door threshold shows where feet passed. A tablet near the floor might record goods stored inside. Suddenly, administration becomes physical. The clay record is not floating in scholarly mist. It belongs to a room, a system, and a day when someone counted things because the temple or palace required it. A mainstream historical fact anchors this recovery. Cuneiform tablets were often made from clay and could survive when baked by fire or preserved in dry conditions. This durability allowed archives from ancient Mesopotamia to endure in large numbers. Scholars estimate that hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets and fragments are known today across museums, universities, and collections. Many remain unpublished or only partly studied, which is both thrilling and mildly rude to anyone seeking closure. The archive is enormous. The answers are still incomplete. That incompleteness defines the modern search. A scholar may spend months on a single tablet, comparing signs, broken lines, grammar, parallel copies, and older readings. A conservator may stabilize a fragment whose surface is flaking. A photographer may use special lighting to reveal faint impressions. A curator may rediscover a miscatalogued piece in a drawer, because even museums sometimes misplace ancient civilization in paperwork. One feels the Sumerians would understand. The hidden event is approached through such details. Not through one dramatic revelation, but through accumulation. A flood deposit here, a royal list there, a temple rebuilding sequence, a myth copied in a school, a change in settlement survey, a layer of abandonment, a grain record showing strain, a later version of an older tale. Each piece is partial, but together they begin to form a shadow with edges. You walk beside a row of excavated walls. They are low now, no higher than the knee in some places, yet they once divided rooms full of heat, smell, and conversation. The plaster has fallen away, the brick has returned toward a mud, a doorway opens into a space where a family may have eaten, argued, slept, stored barley, and complained about neighbours. The past recovered by archaeology is not only royal, it is domestic, tired, practical, and wonderfully inconvenient. That matters for the story. If an event reshaped history, ordinary people carried its consequences. Kings made inscriptions, scribes copied myths, but families moved when fields failed, workers rebuilt canals, mothers watched water rise at thresholds, children learned new city names after migration. The erased event, whatever its exact nature, would not have been experienced as theory. It would have entered bodies, food, houses, and labour. A quirky fringe tidbit follows modern excavations like a persistent fly. Some claim that archaeologists have uncovered evidence too strange to publish. Hidden tablets or chambers proving forbidden versions of human origins. There is no credible support for that claim. Archaeology already has enough difficulty funding careful work without running a secret world history department in the basement. Yet the fantasy reveals public hunger for unresolved ancient questions. People sense that the official story is incomplete, even when the incompleteness is normal, not sinister. In truth, the real discipline is stranger than secrecy. A pottery shard can redraw a trade route, a seed can reveal diet, a collapsed wall can expose city planning, a seal impression can identify administration, a school tablet can preserve a myth older than the student who copied it. Modern archaeology does not need hidden vaults to be wondrous. It turns refuse into revelation. The open scholarly debate concerns how to connect textual evidence with archaeological layers. Some researchers prioritize written traditions, treating them as structured memories of ancient events and institutions. Others emphasize material evidence, warning that texts often reflect elite ideology rather than daily reality. Many scholars now will work between the two, allowing tablets and trenches to question each other. The debate continues because clay signs and buried floors rarely speak at the same volume. You feel that tension at sunset. The excavation quiets, tools are gathered. The trench wall changes colour as the light lowers, and features that seemed flat at noon become visible in shadow. A foundation line appears more clearly. A floor surface catches the eye. The sight seems to reveal itself only when the day is ending, which feels unnecessarily poetic. But the past has always had a flair for timing. A scholar kneels beside a section drawing. Lines are copied onto paper. Measurements are checked. Notes describe soil colour, texture, inclusions, and relationships. The language is plain because the evidence must remain steady. Yet behind the plain words stands an immense imaginative labour. Every layer must be understood as something that happened. Mud was laid, a floor was used, a room collapsed, water entered, people returned or did not. This is how digging becomes listening. Not listening for a single voice, listening for interruption. The recovered older layers show that civilization was never one shining invention that simply advanced without fracture. It was rebuilt repeatedly, modified, repaired, abandoned, remembered, and reinterpreted. The archaeological record resists easy bedtime certainty, which is slightly inconvenient for sleep, but useful for honesty. It says that ancient life was resilient and vulnerable together. Night arrives over the mound. The air cools, and the scent of dust gives way to something almost metallic in the dark. The trench is covered where needed. The tablet fragment rests in storage, labelled with its context. Or it may one day join another fragment. It may clarify a line. It may only add a small name to a long list of uncertainties. That is enough. Modern scholars have dug back down through empire, myth, royal claim, and sacred rebuilding. They have not removed mystery. They have given it walls, layers, objects, and dates. The hidden record is no longer only a murmur in ancient literature. It is also a scar in soil, a sealed room, a tablet in a tray, and a city mound under stars. And as the excavation sleeps, the earth keeps the rest. not refusing forever, only asking for more patience than any single lifetime can spend. The pattern appears only when you stop searching for one perfect level of peace. You sit in a quiet room where tablets, maps, excavation drawings, and copied signs seem to hover together in the half-light. Nothing stands alone now. A flood story rests beside a king list. A temple plan rests beside a divine genealogy. A labour account rests beside a creation myth. At first, they look like separate survivals from a damaged world. Then slowly, like stars becoming constellations, they begin to form a shape. Creation, kingship, burden, flood, renewal. The Sumerian imagination does not treat history as a simple road leading from ignorance to progress, which is probably wise, since progress often arrives carrying a tax register. Instead, many records suggest cycles of ordering and disordering. The world is formed. Divine powers assign places, cities receive status, kingship descends, human beings serve, noise, failure, or disruption grows, waters come, order returns, but altered, the same ideas turn gently in different texts, never identical, yet never wholly separate. This is the pattern of lost beginnings. A mainstream historical fact supports the shape. Ancient Mesopotamian texts often organize time through divine decisions, city sequences, royal succession, and catastrophic interruption. The Sumerian king list, flood traditions, creation accounts, and temple hymns each present history as something structured by powers beyond ordinary human choice. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have described these traditions as literary, religious, and political efforts to make the human world intelligible under divine order. That sounds academic. The feeling is older than academia. You are inside a civilization asking why anything continues. Why do cities stand? Why do fields produce? Why does kingship move from place to place? Why do humans work? Why do disasters seem to cut history in two? The answers do not arrive as clean explanations. They arrive as patterns repeated across generations until the mind begins to accept them as the deep grammar of existence. The first pattern is descent. Kingship descends from heaven, wisdom rises from hidden water. Divine decrees settle upon Vumsa cities. Human beings do not invent order from nothing. They receive it, poorly at times, with all the grace of people being handed responsibilities before breakfast. Descent gives authority a sacred origin. It tells the city that power is not merely force, it is placed, granted, and therefore removable. The second pattern is burden. The gods assign work, temples demand service, fields demand irrigation, canals demand clearing, clay demands marking. The human creature stands between mud and heaven, carrying loads for both. This is not a cheerful vision, but it is honest in its ancient way. Life is maintenance. Civilization is not built once. It is kept from dissolving every day. The third pattern is interruption. Waters rise. Cities fall silent. Kingship pauses. A line divides the primeval from the known. The interruption may be flood, collapse, divine judgment, literary boundary, or memory of repeated environmental disasters. The exact meaning shifts, but the pattern remains. Ancient history is not continuous smoothness, it is survival after fracture. Then comes renewal. That is the fourth pattern, and perhaps the most important. After rupture, kingship descends again, cities resume, ritual returns, names are copied, offerings continue, human beings continue working, because apparently even cosmic disaster does not cancel the canal schedule. Renewal does not erase loss. It places order over loss, like a new floor laid across buried ruin. Beneath the floor, the older layer remains. This layered rhythm appears everywhere in Sumerian culture. Temples are rebuilt over earlier temples, cities rise over older settlements, texts are copied in later schools, myths preserve earlier themes while adapting them to new contexts. Even the land participates. As silt covers old surfaces and new fields form above them. The civilization itself becomes a cycle of covering and recovering. You touch the edge of a map showing ancient cities. Eridu, Uruk, Nippur, Ur, Lagash Kish, Shurapak, but a name carries a different weight. One suggests watery origins, one suggests urban scale, one suggests sacred authority, one suggests royal splendour, one suggests administration, conflict, and memory. The cities seem separate on a map, yet in tradition they become stations in a larger system. Kingship moves, divine favour shifts, no city owns eternity, however much its rulers may have advertised otherwise. A quirky fringe tidbit follows this pattern with great enthusiasm. Some modern writers claim the cycles of creation and destruction prove the Sumerians inherited records from a vanished global age, perhaps one that rose and fell many times before known history. They point to long reigns, flood myths, and divine systems as clues to prehistoric cycles. Mainstream historians do not accept this as evidence for lost world empires, yet the pattern itself is real in literary and religious terms. The Sumerians did imagine history as structured by profound beginnings, breaks, and renewals. You do not need the fringe claim to feel the depth. The records already suggest that beginnings are unstable. A beginning may not be first in the literal sense. It may be the point from which a culture chooses to count. It may be the recovery after catastrophe. It may be the moment order becomes visible enough to write down. If so, the oldest remembered beginning may already be a second beginning. The first one may lie beneath myth, beneath sediment, beneath language itself. That thought grows quietly. Perhaps civilization begins more than once. Not everywhere at the same time, not in one grand theatrical dawn, but in repeated local acts of rebuilding, naming, organizing, and remembering. A flood recedes, and people return. A canal fails, and people cut another. A temple decays, and a new shrine rises above it. A story grows unclear, and a scribe copies the part still known. The human world renews itself through stubbornness, ritual, and paperwork, which is not glamorous but deeply effective. The open scholarly debate concerns whether these cycles reflect real historical experiences of collapse and recovery, or primarily theological and literary structures. Some researchers emphasize environmental instability and urban transformations in early Mesopotamia. Others focus on scribal ideology, where cycles of kingship and divine favour legitimated changing political realities. A broader view allows both. Repeated lived disruptions may have encouraged stories where cosmic order must be restored again and again. You let the wider view breathe. The pattern is not a code to be cracked with one clever sentence. It is more like a woven mat. Pull one strand and others move. Labour connects to creation. Creation connects to divine councils. Divine councils connect to kingship. Kingship connects to cities. Cities connect to floods, canals, and sacred renewal. The erased event may not be hidden at the centre as a single jewel. It may be distributed through the weave. That is harder to grasp. It is also more human. A catastrophic memory can dissolve into custom. A political collapse can become a divine lesson. A dangerous landscape can become theology. A ruler's need for legitimacy can preserve older traditions he does not fully understand. A student copying a list can carry the ghost of a vanished city inside a classroom exercise. Over time, the event becomes system. The room around you grows darker. A small lamp flickers beside the tablets. Shadows gather along the shelves. The signs on the clay seem less like dead writing and more like seeds waiting for water. Each tablet holds a different piece of a recurring human act: to begin, to lose, to name, to rebuild. to pretend the new order is permanent, while secretly knowing the old mud waits below. That hidden knowledge is not despair. It is humility. The Sumerians built cities in a landscape that taught them recurrence. Rivers rose and fell, fields flourished and weakened, temples were renewed, kingships shifted, stories were copied and changed. Beneath the splendour of early civilization was an awareness that everything depends on maintenance, and maintenance never ends. You breathe slowly with that thought. The lost beginning may not be lost because nobody cared. It may be lost because the beginnings are always buried under what they make possible. The first canal disappears beneath later channels. The first shrine disappears beneath later temples. The first terror disappears beneath ritual. The first memory disappears beneath the text that preserves it. So the pattern remains, not a straight answer, but a rhythm, creation, order, burden, rupture, renewal. Again and again, the clay suggests that history is not simply moving forward, it is circling through forms of remembering and forgetting, each cycle leaving traces for hands that arrive much later. And in the dimness, the scattered records feel less scattered than they did. They become a quiet machine of memory, turning slowly in the dark, carrying the outline of a beginning that may have already been a return. The first sound of morning is not a hymn, but the dull scrape of a hoe against canal mud. You stand beside a line of workers moving under a grey-violet sky, their baskets waiting near the bank. The water is low, and the channel is thickened with silt, reeds, broken stalks, and the slow stubbornness of nature. A supervisor calls the rhythm. A scribe sits nearby with a tablet. Because even mud must be persuaded into accountability. The day has barely begun, and already civilization is asking for backs, hands, knees, and breath. This is the machinery beneath the sacred world. Not bronze gears, not hidden engines, people. The ancient records often place humanity within systems of service, and the real city confirms the same pressure through its administrative remains. Tablets from Mesopotamia record rations, work teams, fields, animals, weaving groups, canal labour, and temple deliveries. Research from the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, and the University of Chicago has shown that early Sumerian institutions depended on carefully managed labour. The divine household and the economic household were not separate rooms. They were the same house with the incense in under one corner and grain measures in another. You hear the wet pull as mud leaves the canal bed. A man lifts his basket, another steadies him. A woman carries reeds to reinforce the bank. A boy runs with a message he only partly understands, which is a respected tradition among messengers everywhere. The air smells of damp earth, sweat, river plants, and smoke from breakfast fires across the fields. Somewhere, beer is being brewed. And this is very sensible, because the ancient world rarely rewards sobriety with comfort. The canal must remain open. That is the plain truth. If the canal closes, fields fail. If fields fail, storehouse is empty. If storehouse is empty, offerings decline. If offerings decline, then the city fears divine displeasure. The entire structure is linked, from mud in a channel to food in a temple bowl. You begin to understand why labour could become sacred. It was not because work always felt noble. It was because survival depended on it so completely that neglect seemed almost like blasphemy. The worker is not merely a worker. He is part of a cosmic maintenance crew. That phrase sounds almost modern, perhaps too cheerful. Yet the idea fits the ancient imagination. Human beings maintain the world entrusted to them. They irrigate fields, build walls, prepare offerings, copy names, sing hymns, and keep the gods supplied with ritual attention. In return, the gods maintain fertility, order, kingship, and the boundaries that prevent chaos from pressing in too quickly. The relationship is unequal, But it is not empty. It is an exchange built from dependence. A mainstream historical fact stands beneath the scene. Barley was a central crop in southern Mesopotamia, and barley rations were commonly recorded in early administrative tablets. Workers could receive measured allotments of grain, beer, or other goods through institutional systems. Scholars studying these texts have used them to reconstruct labour organisation, gendered work, craft production, and economic hierarchy. The tablets are dry in style, but what they measure is human life. A ration is never only a number. It is dinner. You move from the canal to a weaving workshop where the air grows warmer and closer. Wool hangs in bundles, fibres catch in the throat, women sit in rows, fingers moving with practiced speed, twisting, drawing foot, and working thread into cloth. The temple or palace may oversee production. The finished textiles may travel through trade, ritual, or royal distribution. Here, labour becomes softness, colour, and value. It also becomes repetition that settles into wrists and shoulders. The loom creaks softly. The sound is almost like breathing. Administrative records from Sumerian cities show that women played major roles in textile production, especially within large institutional households. This fact matters because the workers of the gods were not only mending in canals beneath the sun, they were also women spinning, weaving, grinding grain, brewing, raising children, preparing offerings, and holding the daily fabric of society together. Any story of divine labour that forgets them has simply misplaced half the world, which is not a small accounting error. A quirky fringe tidbit appears here with predictable confidence. Some modern interpreters claim that ancient descriptions of humans serving gods prove people were bred as labourers for a forgotten non-human elite. Mainstream historians do not accept that claim, and the evidence is better understood through ancient religion, social hierarchy, and institutional economy. Yet the bluntness of the old myths keeps the idea alive. Human beings are indeed described as made for service, and the administrative tablets show a world where service structured daily existence. The careful reading is powerful enough. People created gods in the image of social order, perhaps people understood social order through the gods. Either way, the result is the same as you watch the workers move. Labour is not outside belief. It is one of belief's main languages. A temple offering is meaningless without farmers, shepherds, brewers, bakers, potters, fishers, weavers, boatmen, and scribes. The god's meal depends on human hands. The city's protection depends on the god's favour. The circle closes, and everyone inside it must keep moving. You enter a storeroom in the late afternoon. The room is cool and dim. Jars line the walls, sealed with clay stoppers. A scribe breaks one seal, checks contents, and marks a tablet. There is flour dust on the floor. The smell of barley is dry and golden. A worker waits for his ration, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His body knows the day's work. His stomach knows the tablet matters. The scribe presses the sign. The ration is issued. The open scholarly debate concerns how to understand the status of these workers. Some researchers describe early institutional labour as highly controlled, with dependent workers tied closely to temples or palaces. Others emphasise a more varied society, with households and private exchange and seasonal obligations and different degrees of freedom. Archaeologists and historians continue to refine the picture, because economic tablets reveal categories, not always lived experience. A line of writing can say what someone received. It cannot fully say how someone felt. You can still imagine the feeling: fatigue, obligation, pride, resentment, relief at being fed, fear of shortage, the quiet satisfaction of a repaired canal, the dull irritation of being counted incorrectly by someone with clean hands. Human feelings do not need translation across 5,000 years. They arrive quite clearly. As evening settles, workers return through the gate. Their feet are dusty, or their shoulders are lowered. The temple wall glows in the last light, and smoke rises from domestic roofs. A hymn may be sung nearby, but the hymn rests upon the day's labour like a cloth upon a table. Without work, the ritual has no ground. Without ritual, the work may feel meaningless. Together, they form the sacred machinery of Sumerian life. This is humanity's role in its fullest ancient form, not merely servant, not merely victim, not merely beloved creation. Humanity is the bridge between Earth's resistance and heaven's order. People carry clay into bricks, grain into offerings, sound into hymns, names into tablets, and water into fields. They transform the unstable plain into a livable world, then do it again when the river changes its mind. The work never ends, because creation itself is not finished. It must be maintained every morning. Perhaps that is the hidden truth beneath the records. The erased event left behind a lesson more durable than fear. Order is temporary unless served. Cities are temporary unless repaired. Memory is temporary unless copied. Even the gods, in the imagination of the old texts, require human attention. That gives humanity dignity, but not ease. It places people at the centre of maintenance, not the centre of comfort. The canal darkens under the first stars. Water moves through the clear channel with a soft and grateful sound. Tomorrow, it may bring life to fields. Tomorrow, someone will measure it, guide it, worry over it, and complain about it, because ancient people were sensible. The workers sleep, the tablets dry, and the temple stands in shadow. And across the plain, the machinery continues, not loudly, not proudly, but with the slow rhythm of hands keeping the world from becoming mud again. The official story is always cleaner than the floor beneath it. You stand inside a hall where a royal inscription has been placed in careful view. Its lines praising a king who restored temples, defeated enemies, fed the gods, and brought justice to the land. The words are firm, the tone is confident. The ruler appears as shepherd, warrior, builder, chosen servant, and favourite of divine order. It is impressive. Certainly, it is also very tidy, which should make any reasonable listener slightly suspicious. History is rarely tidy while it is happening. It becomes tidy later, when someone important owns a chisel. Ancient civilizations did not remember everything equally. They selected, arranged, and polished the past according to need. Kings remembered victories more eagerly than failures, which is not shocking. Temples remembered donors, rituals, and divine favours. Scribes preserved works that schools valued. Families remembered ancestors, but their voices rarely entered official archives with the same force as rulers and institutions. What survives from Sumer is therefore not the whole past. It is the surviving past shaped by power, accident, fire, mud, and scholarly rescue. That distinction matters deeply. A mainstream historical fact anchors this quiet problem. Most written records from ancient Mesopotamia were produced by literate specialists working for temples, palaces, institutions, or elite households. Literacy was limited, and surviving texts often reflect administrative, religious, legal, educational, and royal concerns. Scholars at Stanford, Yale, and Oxford have long emphasized that ancient archives are partial witnesses. They tell much, but they do not speak for everyone. You walk past the inscription into a darker side room. Here, broken tablets lie in storage baskets. Some are ration lists, some are fragments of letters, some contain legal disputes, debts, adoptions, land sales, or temple accounts. The contrast is sharp. In the hall, the king restores the world. In the storage room, people argue over fields, payments, work obligations, and missing goods. It is wonderfully human. Beneath the smooth official surface, life continues in all its inconvenient detail. A civilization edits itself by preserving certain voices louder than others. The royal voice says order has returned. The rationalist asks who ate. The hidden event, if it truly passed through Sumerian memory, may have suffered this same transformation. A raw disaster among communities becomes a theological lesson. A collapse caused by many pressures becomes a story of divine will. A mass displacement becomes a line about kingship moving elsewhere. An uncomfortable failure of management becomes a moral warning about human noise, neglect, or arrogance. The past is not erased with a knife. It's often translated into a form that power can tolerate. You pause near a tablet with our damaged edges. Its broken lines may once have recorded a dispute between ordinary people. No grand god appears, no king descends in glory. Someone owed something, someone denied it, someone wanted witnesses. There, in the dry legal style. You feel the pressure of actual life. Official memory loves patterns, while life produces exceptions. That is where forgetting begins. Not because people are malicious every time. Sometimes archives forget because their materials decay. Sometimes they forget because no one writes down a servant's grief. Sometimes they forget because later scribes copy myths, but not village complaints. Sometimes they forget because an empire needs continuity more than truth. And sometimes they forget because trauma becomes easier to carry when reshaped into ritual. A scar can become a symbol. A symbol can be repeated until the wound beneath it is no longer visible. A quirky fringe tidbit often rises from this gap. Some modern writers claim ancient institutions deliberately hid the truth about pre-flood beings, lost sciences, or a forbidden origin of humanity. They imagine priests locking away tablets in sealed chambers while the public received softened myths. There is no reliable evidence for such a secret program, yet the suspicion grows from a real feature of history. Institutions do shape memory, and official accounts rarely confess all that they know, all that they fear, or all that they caused. The cautious thought is stronger than the dramatic one. Civilizations do not need secret vaults to forget. They only need to assure us needs priorities. A temple archives offerings because offerings matter to the temple. A palace records tribute because tribute matters to the palace. A school copies old literary texts because training matters to scribal culture. A family story may vanish because no institution depends on preserving it. History chooses through use. What is useful survives more easily. What is painful, local, poor, or embarrassing may sink into silence. You feel the chill of that, not cold air. Cold selection. The open scholarly debate concerns how historians can recover ordinary experience from elite records. Some researchers read administrative texts against the grain, searching for workers, women, children, migrants, slaves, and dependent households hidden inside categories. Others use archaeology, household remains, plant evidence, burials, and settlement surveys to balance the written record. A growing approach treats silence itself as evidence, asking who's missing from the archive and why. The debate remains vital because every archive has shadows. You walk into an ordinary house at dusk. The walls are low and worn, but you can still imagine the room alive. A cooking pot sits near the hearth. A grinding stone rests on the floor. The threshold is smoothed by feet. There may have been laughter here. Boredom, illness, resentment, tenderness, fear when the river rose, and relief when grain arrived. None of that needed a royal inscription. Yet without it, history becomes too polished, too high, too confident. The erased event may live more truthfully in such rooms, not as a single written confession, as altered habits. Perhaps people built higher floors after flood. Perhaps they stored grain differently. Perhaps they moved shrines, rebuilt walls, changed routes, distrusted certain low fields, or repeated warnings to children that later became stories. These actions may leave traces, but not always words. An event can reshape life without receiving a clear name. In fact, the most important events often become invisible because everyone learns to live around them. The king's inscription, meanwhile, proclaims restoration. Restorations is a beautiful word. It is also a selective word. It implies something had broken, but often draws attention toward the ruler who repaired it, not the people who suffered the break. Ancient kings loved building inscriptions because temples lasted, and because future readers might admire them, which, to be fair, worked rather well. Yet every boast of rebuilding quietly admits ruin. Every claim of renewed order whispers that disorder had been near. You listen to that whisper. A wall rebuilt, a canal cleared, a god returned to a temple, a city repopulated. Such phrases are common in ancient royal language, but beneath them lie human disturbances. War, flood, neglect, economic strain, political collapse, religious anxiety. The official record turns these into achievements. The hidden record asks what damage made the achievement necessary. That question is not disrespectful. It is attentive. Ancient Sumerian and later Mesopotamian records are magnificent, but they are not innocent mirrors. They are crafted things, written by trained hands inside institutions. Their beauty lies partly in that crafting. Their danger lies there too. When a society writes itself down, it creates memory with borders. Some things stand inside, others wait outside the wall. Night settles around the hall. The royal inscription still catches lamplight. Its lines remain confident, praising order, piety, victory, and divine favour. In the side room, the broken tablets seem quieter, but not weaker. They contain the small structures of survival, the accounts and disputes that reveal a world where people negotiated daily with power. Beyond both rooms, beneath the floor, older layers wait without language. Perhaps history tried to erase the event by making it useful. It became a warning, a boundary, a myth, a proof of divine authority, a reason for kingship, a reason for labour, a reason to rebuild. Its original shape blurred, yet its consequences remained everywhere, into the temples that demanded order, in the lists that named powers, in the kings who claimed restoration, in the workers who cleared canals, in the silence around those whose voices were never copied. You leave the hall slowly. The inscription does not lie completely. It simply speaks too loudly, and in the quieter dust beyond it, you sense that the deepest past is not hidden because it is gone. It is hidden because so much has been written over it, layer after layer, until the erased event survives as pressure beneath the polished story, still shaping the surface from below. The clay still speaks softly, but it never speaks in a single voice. You sit in a dim museum room after the visitors have gone, where the glass cases reflect only weak lamps and the faint outline of your own face. The tablets rest inside their quiet compartments, each one numbered, measured, translated, and still not fully subdued. A label may offer a date, a place, a language, a summary. It is helpful. It is also small beside the thing itself. The tablet does not feel finished. It feels interrupted. A corner is missing. A line is broken. A name is uncertain. A sign has been pressed so deeply that it remains sharp, while the next sign is softened into damage. Some tablets are dark from firing, others pale from salt and soil. They carry fingerprints and smoothing marks, cuts, accidental scratches, and the strange intimacy of ancient hands. They are not just texts, they are touched objects, and touch survives where voices do not. That is why they disturb certainties. A mainstream historical fact that remains central to this room. Many Sumerian compositions survive in multiple copies from different periods, often fragmentary, and scholars reconstruct them by comparing signs across tablets. Research at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania has shown how careful philology can recover myths, hymns, proverbs, royal lists, and school exercises from damaged material. Yet reconstruction is never the same as perfect recovery. The clay gives enough to follow, then withholds enough to humble. You lean toward one case, the tablet inside contains lines from an old tradition, perhaps a hymn, perhaps a mythic passage, perhaps part of a list that once seemed routine to its maker. The translation beside it is calm, but every bracket and uncertain reading feels like a candle flickering in a draught. Modern scholarship is honest about gaps. It marks what is missing. It marks what is restored. It marks where confidence fades into probability. That honesty is beautiful. It is also unsettling, because the missing lines may be exactly where the question lived. A broken section might once have named a city, described a ritual, explained a divine decision, or connected one tradition to another. Or perhaps it contained something ordinary, such as a Formula 100 scribes copied without interest. The absence does not announce its importance. It simply opens a space where imagination must be watched carefully. The clay invites you closer, but not too closer. It asks for patience, not conquest. In the quiet room, you notice how the tablets resist modern hunger for a single hidden truth. One fragment suggests catastrophe, another suggests order, another speaks of kingship, another lists offerings, another names gods whose stories are gone. The archive is not a locked chest with one secret inside. It is more like a ruined city at night, where each doorway opens into a different darkness, or a quirky fringe tidbit often thrives in those dark doorways. Some people claim that missing tablet lines conceal the real account of a suppressed primeval event, and that scholars already know more than they admit. There is no credible reason to accept that suspicion. Scholars disagree in public, publish difficult readings, and often confess uncertainty with admirable lack of drama. Still, the damaged tablets create emotional space for such ideas, because every broken edge seems to whisper, what if the missing part mattered most? You can understand the temptation. You do not need to obey it. The stronger mystery lies in what is actually present. The tablets repeatedly show a civilization concerned with origin, divine order, human service, catastrophe, renewal, and the proper arrangement of names. They show that Sumerian memory reached behind ordinary dynasties into a primeval landscape where kings ruled before disaster and gods organized existence. They do not prove one sensational claim. They prove the ancient mind carried a deep before and placed human civilization within it. That is enough to trouble accepted simplicity. The old classroom exercises are especially strange in this way. A student copying a proverb or list may not intend to preserve cosmic memory, yet his practice tablet can carry pieces of a literary tradition that later ages would lose. His mistakes may show how language was taught. His corrections may reveal which signs were difficult. His small effort becomes a surviving bridge. History often depends on someone doing homework badly enough that the tablet was discarded, then buried, then found. There is comfort in that. Even failure preserves. You move to another case where a tablet bears administrative signs, barley, workers, rations, animals, quantities. At first it seems far from myth. Yet the numbers carry the same world. These are the people whose lives made temples function. These are the measured bodies behind divine service. If creation stories say humanity was made to labour, administrative tablets show how labour was organised. If flood stories speak of rupture, ration records show the fragile system that rupture could break. The ordinary record confirms the mythic atmosphere from below, not literally, structurally. The open scholarly debate turns on how to connect these levels without forcing them into one another. Some researchers emphasize textual traditions as symbolic worlds shaped by scribal schools. Others ask how economy, environment, and political power influenced the myths those schools preserved. Another approach sees no firm wall between them. because the same institutions that counted grain also copied hymns. The debate remains open because Mesopotamian life did not divide itself according to modern academic departments, which was inconsiderate but realistic. You sit back and let the room breathe. A tablet is an object of earth that carries a human attempt to defeat forgetting, yet the defeat is partial. Clay preserves signs, but not tone. It preserves names, but not always meaning. It preserves stories, but not the first telling around a lamp or beside a canal. It preserves official memory better than private fear. It preserves what dried, what fired, what was stored, what was discarded in the right place. So much depended on accident. A room burns and tablets survive. A wall collapses and an archive is sealed. A student throws away an exercise, and a future century learns from it. A king orders an inscription, and his enemies vanish from his version. A myth is copied because it belongs to curriculum, and an older event rides quietly inside its lines. The past survives not because it was fair, but because material chance and human habit made strange bargains. The clay speaks softly because it knows this. It does not shout certainty across the centuries. It offers broken evidence. It lets scholars rebuild what they can and lets the rest remain dark. It teaches that the deepest record is neither wholly myth nor wholly history. It is a field of fragments where memory, power, environment, ritual, and imagination settle together like silt. Your mind returns to the central unease. Something in these records insists on a world before the familiar world, not necessarily a lost empire with shining towers, not necessarily secret beings walking openly among people, but a remembered otherness, a time separated by flood, mythic rains, divine decisions, and the repeated need to begin again. The tablets refuse to let history be only a clean ascent from village to city to empire. They leave a seam, they leave pressure, they leave a damp mark where water once stood. In the museum room, the lights seem lower now. The clay cases hold their small brown witnesses. Each tablet is quiet enough to be missed, yet durable still, enough to outlast stone boasts, royal bloodlines, and every confident summary. You realize that the surviving records do not solve the erased event. They preserve its outline by refusing to become simple. The clay still speaks softly. It says that memory is broken, but not empty. It says that myth may carry real fear, while history may carry mythic shape. It says that official order often grows above buried disruption. It says that human beings have always lived between what they can prove and what they cannot stop remembering. And in that hot uncertainty, the old tablets keep their vigil, waiting with the patience of fired earth, offering not a final answer, but the calm discomfort of a question that has survived everything meant to silence it. The last tablet is not whole, and that feels appropriate. You hold it in the imagination beneath a low amber light, where every broken edge seems less like damage and more like a boundary. The surface is crowded with signs, but the missing kana interrupts the final line. A name vanishes into absence. A number ends without its companion. A phrase begins confidently, then falls away into the silence of lost clay. The record does not close neatly. It never truly did. Ancient Sumer leaves you with fragments of a world that knew itself through lists, hymns, labour accounts, divine decrees, royal sequence, and stories of waters that divided time. It leaves cities rising from mud and returning to mud. It leaves temples rebuilt above older sanctuaries, as though each generation tried to stand a little higher above uncertainty. It leaves kings who claimed heaven, workers who cleared canals, scribes who copied impossible reigns, and gods who arranged the burdened shape of human life. The mystery remains calm but not small. A mainstream historical fact gives this ending its weight. Sumerian civilization helped create some of the earliest known cities and writing systems, and its records became part of the wider intellectual inheritance of Mesopotamia. Scholars from the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have built modern understanding from excavated tablets, architectural remains, settlement surveys, and careful study of ancient languages. Their work shows a real civilization, deeply human, technically skilled, religiously complex, and never as simple as later summaries make it seem. You stand at the edge of the old plain one last time. The evening's windless. The horizon glows with the fading copper of sunset. A canal reflects the sky in broken strips. Date palms stand dark against the light, somewhere beyond sight. Marsh birds settle into reeds with small restless cries. The air smells of cooling mud brick, river dampness, and smoke from unseen hearths. It feels like an ending, but endings are tricky things. The Sumerian records do not give you one sealed answer about the event history tried to erase. They give you a field of possibilities, each one partly lit. The event may have been a flood, or many floods gathered into one sacred memory. It may have been a social collapse remembered through divine judgment. It may have been the slow terror of environmental change, river movement, salinity, migration, and political rupture. It may have been less a single event than a wound repeated until story made it bearable. Perhaps that is enough. Not every hidden truth is a hidden object. Sometimes it is a pattern of remembering. Sometimes it is the way a civilization explains why order must descend, why people must labour, why cities must be renewed, and why the world feels older than its surviving walls. The erased event may survive not in one forbidden line, but in the structure of Sumerian thought itself. Creation is not secure. Kingship can vanish. Water can undo the map. Humanity is made from clay and placed under obligation. Memory must be copied, or it fades. That is a quiet revelation. It does not shout from the ruins. It waits inside repetition. The quirky fringe tidbit still hovers at the edge of the story, like a lamp seen through dust. Some imagine the records preserve literal memories of teachers from elsewhere, rulers from lost ages, or a civilization drowned beneath known history. Mainstream scholarship does not confirm those claims. Yet the emotional reason they endure is understandable. The Sumerian texts speak so often of deep time, divine oversight, and broken beginnings that the modern imagination reaches for something enormous. The clay does not require that leap. It is already enormous. A broken list of kings can unsettle ordinary time. A creation account can make human life feel both sacred and assigned. A flood story can compress generations of fear into one remembered wave. A temple platform can cover older thresholds without destroying them. A ration tablet can reveal the human bodies beneath cosmic order. A divine list can preserve forgotten powers as names with no faces. Each fragment is small. Together they create depth. The open scholarly debate remains alive because no single method can master the evidence completely. Textual scholars read damaged signs and compare versions across centuries. Archaeologists study layers, buildings, tools, bones, seeds, and sediments. Historians ask how power shaped memory. Environmental researchers ask how rivers, climate, and soil changed human choices. Some emphasize mythic structure. Others search for historical kernels. The best work listens across these approaches, allowing uncertainty to remain part of the truth. That uncertainty is not failure. It is the shape of ancient evidence. You walk slowly along the imagined canal bank as night spreads across the plain. The mud is cool underfoot. A frog calls from the reeds. The first stars appear, faint and patient, behind you. The city is neither fully alive nor fully ruined. It exists in the mind as Sumer often does, suspended between excavation and dream. A doorway glows. A scribe bends over clay. A worker lifts a basket. A priest watches smoke rise. A king's name dries on a tablet, hoping to last forever. Forever is a difficult ambition. Clay manages it better than kings. The event history tried to erase may not have been erased by hatred. It may have been softened by use, covered by rebuilding, translated by priests, numbered by scribes, sanctified by kings, and repeated until its sharpest edges became tradition. The raw moment disappeared, but its outline remained. It remained as a fear of water. It remained as a belief in renewed kingship. It remained as the need to organize gods, cities, labour, and memory into a system strong enough to resist chaos. Perhaps every civilization does this. It builds on top of what frightened it. A city wall is a memory of danger. A law code is a memory of conflict. A temple is a memory of dependence. A flood myth is a memory of water entering places where water should not be. A king list is a memory of power trying to survive death through sequence. A tablet is a memory afraid of forgetting. The old Sumerian world becomes less distant when seen this way. It is not merely exotic, not merely ancient, not merely a museum of strange gods and impossible numbers. It is human. It is a culture trying to make meaning from fragility, trying to preserve order in a landscape that could change overnight, trying to place labour, loss, and survival inside a story large enough to hold them. Your breathing slows with the darkness. The plain is nearly black now. The canal has become only a ribbon of reflected stars. The city mound rests in silence. Beneath it lie floors, ashes, jars, seals, stones, tablets, and a fierce compressed breath of people who believed their world had been arranged by powers beyond them. They may have been right in their own language, or they may have named forces that modern people call environment, institution, memory, and fear. Perhaps both readings touch something true. The unfinished record does not ask you to choose too quickly. It asks you to remain near the threshold, where scholarship and myth can stand without devouring each other. It asks you to admit that ancient people were not naive children in a dark world. They were careful observers, anxious builders, practical workers, and profound makers of meaning. They knew that clay could harden. They knew that water could erase. They knew that names could outlive bodies. The last tablet rests in lamplight. Its broken edge keeps its secret, and perhaps somewhere beyond the known lines the story is not yet complete. The night grows softer now, and the old plain loosens its hold on your thoughts. The city walls sink back into darkness. The temple steps fade into shadow. The canal becomes quieter, carrying only the faint reflection of stars across its slow surface. You do not need to solve the tablets tonight. You only need to let them rest. The scribes have set down their reeds. The workers have returned from the fields. The king's proud words have cooled into clay. The gods of the old cities have withdrawn into names, and the names themselves sleep inside museums, storerooms, and buried rooms not yet opened. You breathe in, slowly. You breathe out gently. The dust settles. The marsh birds fold their wings. The lamps in the city go out one by one, until only the moon touches the roofs with pale light. Nothing demands an answer now. The flood is distant. The broken tablets are still. The long reigns of forgotten kings drift away like numbers spoken in a dream. Perhaps history is not a locked door. Perhaps it is a quiet shoreline, where waves bring fragments and carry others away. You receive what reaches you. You release what remains hidden. That is enough for one night. The old world keeps breathing under the soil, not loudly, not urgently, just there, beneath the floor of the memory, patient as clay, calm as silt, waiting for another careful hand, another quiet mind, another listener in the dark. And as your eyes grow heavy, the ancient rivers move on without hurry, through reed beds, through moonlight, through the long, soft silence between what was remembered and what was lost. Good night.